Support comes from Holocaust Museum Houston, a cultural institution offering immersive exhibits featuring authentic film footage, artifacts, and more, focused on history, education, and remembrance. Details at hmh.org. Sunny day today, will warm up to 67. Clear skies tonight, a low 40, and then again tomorrow, another sunny day, the high 58. It's 63. This is your NPR station, KUHF, Houston News 88.7, a service of the University of Houston. It's 1 o'clock.
Funding for Here and Now comes from MathWorks, creator of MATLAB and Simulink software, accelerating the pace of engineering and science. Learn more at mathworks.com.
From NPR and WBUR Boston, I'm Indira Lakshmanan.
I'm Peter O'Dowd. It's Here and Now. Coming up, 6 federal prosecutors in Minnesota resign over the Justice Department's push to investigate Renee Macklin Good's widow rather than the ICE officer who shot her.
To suddenly divert an investigation and to divert attention over to the wife of the victim? I mean, come on, this is un-American.
Also, we look at the history of police brutality caught on tape and efforts to control the narrative.
Plus, we're looking at 25 objects that tell the story of America for the country's 250th anniversary. First up, postage stamps from 1847.
They're little snapshots of what a country thinks is important about itself at the time they were issued.
Coming up, Here and Now.
The news is first.
Live from NPR News, I'm Lakshmi Singh. The Iranian government is branding those taking part in mass protests across the country terrorists and murderers. The head of the judiciary warns they could be executed. NPR's Jackie Northam reports.
Iran's judiciary chief said the Iranian regime needed to move quickly to judge and punish anyone taking part in the protests, and that any protesters who beheaded or burned anyone alive should be executed. His comments followed a warning by President Trump that the U.S. would take, quote, very strong action if protesters were handed the death penalty. Trump urged Tehran to show some humanity. More than 18,000 people have been detained in the protests, which started in late December, according to the Human Rights Activist Network in Iran. The group says more than 2,400 people have died. Jackie Northam, NPR News.
Against the backdrop of escalating tensions in Iran, some U.S. military personnel are leaving the Al Udeid air base in Qatar, according to a U.S. official not authorized to speak publicly. In a social media statement, the Qatari government also addressed evacuations of some personnel in response to current regional tensions. The Trump administration has abruptly terminated hundreds of federal grants for frontline addiction treatment programs. Local government and nonprofit groups say the cuts, totaling roughly $2 billion, will be devastating. Here's NPR's Brian Mann.
In termination letters viewed by NPR, the U.S. Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration says programs don't align with the Trump administration's public health agenda and are being defunded effective immediately. NPR asked federal officials for details about the cuts but got no response. Ryan Hampton heads a program that educates addiction response teams. He says his group lost $500,000 overnight.
We're going to have to scale back and cancel a lot of our overdose prevention, training, education, technical support work that we do in the state of Nevada and across the country. It's catastrophic for us.
Public health experts tell NPR as many as 2,000 programs could be forced to downsize or close. Brian Mann, NPR News, Washington.
The U.S. Attorney's Office in Minnesota is in turmoil following the mass resignation of at least 6 veteran federal prosecutors. Here's Minnesota Public Radio's Matt Sepe.
The lawyers quit over Justice Department pressure to investigate Becca Good, the widow of Renee Macklin Good, who was killed by an ICE agent last week. The prosecutors also object to the Justice Department's reluctance to investigate the agent himself. Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche says there's no basis for a criminal civil rights investigation.
Meanwhile, a federal judge in Minneapolis did not immediately grant a temporary halt to the ICE operation in Minnesota in a status conference this morning, but will hold a hearing on the issue either late next week or early the following week. The judge said, while the matter is important, there is no substantial case law basis to make an immediate decision. From Washington, this is NPR News.
Live from the Texas newsroom, I'm Alexandra Hart. Kerr County commissioners voted this week to move forward on a flood warning siren system in the wake of July 4th flooding that left more than 100 dead along the Guadalupe River. Texas Public Radio's Brian Kirkpatrick reports.
Commissioners approved an agreement with the Upper Guadalupe River Authority, or UGRA, to create the flood warning system. The River Authority's general manager, Tara Bushno, told commissioners the agreement creates a mechanism for her agency to seek state water development board funds to help pay for the system.
This really continues our partnership between UGRA and Kerr County to make significant advance on the flood warning system for our community.
The sirens could be used to alert those on the riverbanks about rising waters. The river on the 4th rose 26 feet in just 45 minutes, flooding summer camps. I'm Brian Kirkpatrick in San Antonio.
The Texas Supreme Court will decide whether the Department of State Health Services unlawfully made the intoxicating hemp-derived compound Delta-8 illegal. The department issued a notice in 2021 to that effect. It's currently on pause because of an injunction won by hemp retailers who say the department was acting outside its authority. Corey Scanlon is with the Texas Attorney General's office. He says the legislature gave the department the power to decide what substances are illegal, and THC always has been.
Texas's hemp program has never been a legally permissible vehicle for the proliferation of synthetic and intoxicating forms of that drug.
Scanlon also denied the seller's claims that the department would enforce criminal or civil penalties against them. I'm Alexandra Hart from the Texas Newsroom.
Support for these Texas headlines comes from Fort Worth's Kimball Art Museum, presenting Myth and Marble, ancient Roman sculpture from the Torlonia collection, featuring carvings, portraits, sarcophagi, and more. Now on view. More at kimbellarts.org.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Progressive Insurance, home of the Name Your Price tool, so drivers can see coverage options at progressive.com or 1-800-PROGRESSIVE. Price and coverage match limited by state law. And the listeners who support this NPR station.
For more local news happening in the Houston area, go to our website, houstonpublicmedia.org. This is News 88.7.
From NPR and WBUR, I'm Indira Lakshmanan in Boston.
I'm Peter O'Dowd in Phoenix. This is Here and Now. The U.S. Attorney's Office in Minnesota is about to look a lot different in the coming days after 6 federal prosecutors resigned. They are upset over the direction of the federal investigation into the shooting of Renee Macklin Good. The Justice Department is reportedly focusing its inquiry on Good's widow. It will not include an investigation into the agent who fired the shots into her SUV in Minneapolis on January 7th. Mary McCord was a prosecutor for nearly 20 years at the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia. She's with us now. Mary, nice to speak with you.
Nice to speak with you too, Peter.
You've spent a lot of years in a U.S. Attorney's Office. What's your reaction to these resignations? Would you have done the same?
Well, I mean, 6 senior attorneys is a really big blow, including, it appears, their criminal division chief. That's a position that I held in the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office. Their former acting U.S. attorney, who just in the fall announced, major indictments in fraud cases. So this is a very big blow to that office and to the work of that office to have so many people leave. And I'm sure it also will affect the morale in that office. And in terms of would I have done the same? I mean, we've seen, this is not the first resignation at a U.S. Attorney's officer at the Department of Justice. We can go back to the beginning of the Trump administration, where the criminal chief or the acting U.S. attorney in New York resigned over the Eric Adams investigation for pressure being put upon her to drop that case. We saw the criminal chief in D.C. resign a little bit later over pressure put on her to do something she thought was not warranted and not ethical. And I think there comes a time when, and I want to be clear, career prosecutors like these people and like I was, they have worked under Republican administrations, they've worked under Democratic administrations, and, they're not usually susceptible to sort of politics. So when you see this kind of resignation, it's because things have gone way too far and they think they're being asked to do things that are potentially unlawful in violation of their ethical responsibilities, professional responsibilities, and not supported by the evidence or the facts.
Mary, these prosecutors were reportedly upset because there was no plan to launch a civil rights investigation into the agent who shot Renee Good, but they did plan to investigate if her widow had ties to activist groups in Minnesota, which, by the way, is not a crime. Is that in any way standard procedure after an incident like this?
No, it's not. And typically that involves an additional set of 6 resignations we saw from the Civil Rights Division within what we think of as Main Justice, the headquarters here in Washington, D.C. And, ordinarily when you have a federal agent involved in a killing like this, the Civil Rights Division would launch an investigation into whether there was a violation of federal civil rights statutes. And
in any administration, that would typically happen?
I've seen that in administrations of, with a Republican leadership and Democratic leadership. And so those are the people with experience in those type of investigations. It's important to do those types of investigations. And so it was pretty staggering for Harmeet Dillon, the Assistant Attorney General over Civil Rights, to say, we're not going to do that. It wasn't even like, we'll investigate, and they investigate a little and they decide no charges should be brought. That could be a reasonable conclusion. But to say we're not even going to investigate, that's pretty extraordinary. And of course, it comes on the heels of something else extraordinary, which is that, highest level members of the administration, including the President of the United States, immediately after this shooting, said that this was a self-defense justified shooting, accused Renee Good of trying to, mow down an ICE agent with her car. In other words, coming to a conclusion before there was even an investigation. To then target, your second part of the question, to target, her wife and others for potential ties to activist groups, as you indicated, activist groups, protest activity is First Amendment protected. Associating with others who have similar ideology is First Amendment protected. Now, if people engaging in free speech also engage in violations of law, whether it's violence or something else, that's one thing. But simply being associated with those who might be opposed to ICE's surges in Minneapolis and elsewhere, that is protected by the First Amendment. So I think that, you can see, just spelling this out, why this would drive career prosecutors as well as people in the Civil Rights Division of the Main Justice to leave.
There is related news I want to ask you about. Michigan Senator Elise Slotkin says the U.S. attorney in D.C. is investigating her for taking part in that video produced by Democratic lawmakers that we've reported on that urged U.S. troops to defy illegal orders. The president had called that video seditious. Sedition is a crime punishable by death. What kind of signal does this send, considering everything we've just spoken about?
Well, this is, consistent with so many things we've seen from this president and his administration, which is to use whatever levers they think they have of executive authority to put pressure on people to not speak out, to come to heel, to get them to, willingly give up their constitutional rights. And I would note, with respect to Senator Slotkin, we're not just talking about her free speech rights as a, citizen and resident of the United States. She is an elected senator who also has an obligation under Article 1 of the Constitution, right, to represent the people that she was elected to represent. And she has, an obligation to speak out on issues that involve Congress's authority. And again, I wouldn't say she was even urging people to defy orders. She was reminding the military officers of their obligations.
Mary McCord, we need to leave it there. Former prosecutor, federal prosecutor, thank you so much for your insights.
My pleasure.
Continuing our coverage of Minneapolis, we're joined now by Princeton historian Julian Zelizer. He's written a new essay called From Rodney King to Renee Good, The Battle to Control Reality. Welcome, Julian.
Thanks for having me. Nice to be back.
So back in 1991, a bystander with a camcorder caught 4 white LA police officers brutally beating an unarmed black man named Rodney King. The city erupted in riots after the officers were acquitted. Similar cases include the 2014 video of Eric Gardner, the 2020 video of George Floyd, who were both killed by police while being arrested over alleged minor infractions. Now a federal agent was filmed shooting to death a woman whose car was blocking an intersection. So bystanders' video and body cams once helped hold authorities accountable for the most part. You say that's now being weakened by a, quote, battle to control reality.
Well, I think that's what's so striking. Back when that horrendous video came out about Rodney King, there was still the promise that technology, in that case Sony hand cams, but later phones, would be able to hold police and policing accountable, because citizens could record what previously had been left to government reports or oral testimony. But I think, as we're seeing right now, there's many obstacles that those videos face to spread what actually happened. And they're being undermined by many political and technological forces.
Well, let's talk about that. In past cases of police brutality caught on tape, most people could believe what they saw on video. Now there's AI. How dangerous is that to what people believe, to legal accountability, to the historical record?
I think AI is going to be a big challenge. I don't think that's particularly what's going on right now, but there's two dangers. One, AI allows people to manufacture and subvert images very easily, so people literally won't know what they're seeing. And it will just undermine trust altogether in this kind of technology. So when a video comes out, as we saw in Minneapolis, there'll be more in the public who will assume it might not be true, it might be manufactured. Mm-hmm. So on both fronts, I think AI might take us into a new era, very different than 1991.
Well, you argue that the main problem now is that President Trump is leading a so-called disinformation ecosystem and undermining the power of images, like don't believe what your lying eyes are telling you. What do you mean?
Well, I think we saw it right after this video was released, soon after the shooting and the death took place. President Trump was trying to spin a narrative about what people were seeing, castigating Good and her wife in a very particular light, calling them radicals and using the word terrorist. Basically making assertions that the car was being used as a weapon. So it's about, even when the image is there, trying to use the bully pulpit and the platforms associated with it to spin a story that's very different than what I think many Americans saw with their eyes. And we're seeing how that can stick pretty quickly in the modern age.
All right, well, to counteract that, what's the role of the media to clarify what is real and what's not?
That is the role of the media, and in older days we hoped that was a powerful platform to counteract what politicians were saying, but right now I'm not sure we're there anymore. Not only do you have a lot of partisan media, you have a lot of filterless social media outlets where this disinformation spreads very quickly, and even a lot of legacy institutions, as we're seeing, are under immense political pressure to be quiet or even to support the words of the administration in this case. So that's the danger of not having full-throated news media monitoring this.
In the very brief time we have left in a polarized society where people, as you say, consume partisan media and live in their own information bubbles, is this problem even fixable?
It is fixable, and there were a lot of protests that took place over the weekend. There are elected officials and even policing officials in Minneapolis who are speaking out, and we shouldn't underestimate the power of the Democratic will to counteract some of this. So it's going to be a struggle, but it is a struggle, and I don't discount the ability of citizens to change the course of history.
Princeton historian Julian Zelizer. You can find a link to his essay on our website, hereandnow.org. Julian, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
You're listening to Here and Now. Of Nicolás Maduro from Venezuela mean for the future of the oil industry?
If you're benefiting the U.S. economy, it's probably to the detriment of someone, potentially Venezuela.
I'm Juana Summers. We go to Texas, which has the most refining capacity in the United States, for answers on All Things Considered from NPR News.
You can hear it today starting at 3 o'clock. It's 1:19. Let's check on the weather forecast. Here's ABC 13 meteorologist Travis Herzog.
Hold on to those steering wheels this afternoon as the winds start gusting 30 to 40 miles per hour. We've got a cold front blowing in. Plenty of sunshine. Temperatures still warm, close to 70 degrees. But tonight you'll feel the cooling impact of that front as our temperatures drop down into the upper 30s. Lots of sunshine Thursday with a high of 57. And a stronger cold front arriving Friday night could bring our first light freeze or frost of the new year. I'm ABC 13 Chief Meteorologist Travis Herzog for News 88.7.
Support comes from the Houston Automotive Show at NRG Center, featuring boats for all lifestyles, marine gear, and fishing demonstrations within the combined auto and boat event. More information on schedules, exhibitors, and venue details at automotiveshow.com.
Support for Houston Public Media comes from ROCO, presenting Quartet for All Time, featuring Chamberworks by Messiaen and more. Saturday, January 24th at Texas Southern University. Tickets at roco.org.
Funding for Here and Now comes from the Menlotra Institute at Boston University, hosting the Is Business Broken podcast, featuring conversations with academics, industry leaders, and politicians. More at ibms.bu.edu.
It's Here and Now. Latin America has been swept up in a rapid chain of events since the U.S. ousted Venezuela's President Nicolás Maduro and brought him to New York to face trial. President Trump is projecting Washington's power across the region on a scale not seen since the U.S. invaded Panama nearly 40 years ago. Yet the response from some of Latin America's most strident leftist leaders has been surprisingly subdued. NPR's Carrie Kahn reports.
Supporters of Colombian President Gustavo Petro streamed into downtown Bogota last week, heeding Petro's calls to defend the nation's sovereignty. After U.S. forces seized Venezuela's Maduro, President Trump hinted that Colombia and Petro, who Trump had accused of being a drug trafficker, could be the next target for U.S. military action. Petro, friend, the people are with you, shouted the crowd as it waited to hear from the 65-year-old leftist leader. After 3 hours, Petro finally appeared in Bogota's huge Bolivar Plaza with a stunning explanation for his delay.
Dice Trump.
He was on the phone with Trump.
Fue un gran honor hablar con el presidente de Colombia, Gustavo Petro.
It was an honor to speak with Colombian President Gustavo Petro, he reads Trump's Truth Social post as the crowd breaks into applause.
Y espero reunirme con él próximamente.
And more enthusiasm as Petro says Trump has invited him to the White House.
En Washington, D.C.
The following day, he posts a picture of a U.S. bald eagle nuzzling a Colombian jaguar. Apart from Cuba's steadfast defiance, Petro has recently become the Latin American left's leading voice, trading insults with Trump. But Massimo Modonisi, a political scientist at Mexico's National Autonomous University, says above all, he's a pragmatic politician.
Lo atacan y no le permiten tener lugar de negociación.
If he's attacked and there is no space for negotiation, Modonisi says Petro resorts to radical rhetoric. Petro is part of a group of leftist leaders in Latin America, including the presidents of Brazil, Mexico, and Chile that swept into office during the last decade on a wave of progressive promises. But since the U.S. attack on Venezuela, many are taking a strikingly less defiant tone. Here's the newly installed interim president, Delcy Rodriguez, on state TV last week, displaying deft rhetorical skills to exhibit defiance and compliance.
Y no nos vamos a rendir frente a ningún tipo de agresión.
We will not surrender in the face of aggression, she says, while adding, our hands are open to all countries in cooperation, including for energy agreements.
Para cooperación energética.
A clear capitulation to Trump's demands for a U.S. takeover of Venezuela's oil industry. Even Interior Minister Diosdado Cabello, Venezuela's vociferous ideologue and feared head of the state's repressive police forces, has been mollified in recent days.
Buenas noches a toda Venezuela, los saludamos desde aquí.
On his long-running state TV show, usually taped before an energetic pro-regime audience, a fidgeting Cabello nervously wrestles papers in his first episode since Maduro's capture.
La misma situación.
None of this toned-down rhetoric is surprising given Maduro's capture, says Cornell University political scientist Santiago Enria. That's because Cabello is also a defendant in the U.S. indictment charging Maduro and his wife with drug trafficking. And political scientist Enria says the left in Latin America is at a crossroads.
A left that was already pretty weakened and fragmented by its own mistakes in the past.
The right has made major electoral gains in recent years throughout Latin America, including in Argentina, Ecuador, and most recently Chile. And more wins could be coming this year in elections in Colombia and Brazil. Mexican political scientist Massimo Modenese agrees.
La oleada de derecha es muy fuerte y la propia izquierda le ha abierto la puerta abandonando.
The right political wave now sweeping Latin America is very strong, he says. But don't discount a resurgence of the left. It's long championed unresolved issues the right hasn't, like the gaping income inequality plaguing the region. Cornell political scientist Santiago Enria also urges caution for those declaring the death of Latin America's left.
I think they will be disappointed by that in the longer run, but it is surely a moment of reckoning and of reimagination.
Carrie Kahn, NPR News, Bogota, Colombia.
This afternoon on All Things Considered, the global system that President Trump wants. Foreign policy experts say it looks more like the 19th century's world order. You can hear that story on the NPR app or on your trusted local member station.
Americans love big trucks and SUVs despite their big price tags. But could we also learn to love cars that are tiny and cheaper? Some of these micro cars are turning heads in Japan, and one of them even got a surprise endorsement from President Trump last month. Here's NPR's Camila Damanowski.
It was a classic President Trump riff, an aside about cars you can buy in Asia.
They have a very small car. It's sort of like the Beetle used to be with the Volkswagen. They're very small, they're really cute.
In Japan, these teeny tiny cars are known as K-cars, K-E-I. The president went on to say he would authorize building these cars in the U.S., and he heaped on more praise.
Some of them are really beautiful, actually.
This surprised and delighted America's K-car enthusiasts.
Sounds kind of like an angry sewing machine.
That's Andrew Maxson. We're riding in his red AutoZam AZ1, a vehicle he lovingly calls ridiculous. We're sitting a few inches off the ground with the turbo engine a few inches behind our heads, racing at 40 miles per hour. Maxson founded the Capital K Car Club, which gathered at a park in Northern Virginia this month to talk with me about their beloved little vehicles, which are best described as...
tiny. Very tiny.
That's Ryan Douglas, who replaced his mid-size American truck with a pint-sized Japanese one. How tiny? Imagine a pickup truck that's smaller, bumper to bumper, than a modern Mini Cooper. But Douglas's tiny pickup is surprisingly practical. You can still fit a sheet of plywood in the back. The bed is 6 feet long, longer than you'll find on a lot of massive pickups.
I can lay down in the bed and not even touch the ends of it.
Now, these trucks aren't made for the U.S. market, so while new ones might meet safety standards for things like seatbelts and airbags in Japan, they are not designed to meet the U.S. versions of those rules. You can't import them unless they're 25 years old and get an antique exemption from federal safety rules. So every vehicle here is at least that old. But they get great gas mileage and they're affordable. New in Japan, they can be bought for less than $15,000, and the imported antiques might run $5,000 to $8,000 here. Douglas marvels at how much cheaper they are than American-style trucks.
I think I could get 5 or 6 of these and customize them to my heart's desire and still be cheaper than a brand new truck that I can buy off the dealership today.
There are drawbacks, of course. Douglas's license plate spells out very slow, a warning to cars behind him. In a crash, your knees are right at the front, no crumple zone. Antique vehicle vehicles lack things like airbags. Safety concerns are why some states ban these cars, annoying K-car drivers who note that motorcycles aren't exactly safe and they're illegal. Dan Kobayashi, who drives a K-truck, asks, what is a safe car? After all, a car that's slow and small is safer for pedestrians, and K-cars have much better visibility because there's no big hood. So, unlike the driver of a big SUV, Kobayashi says,
I don't have to worry about hitting kids in front of me because I can see in front of me.
But K-car drivers do have to worry whether other drivers can see them on American roads with giant vehicles moving at high speeds. Now, there's nothing stopping companies from building super small vehicles for the U.S. market, ones that meet those federal safety standards. Nothing stopping them except, well, Americans.
People didn't want to buy them.
Jessica Caldwell is the head of insights at the car data site Edmunds.
We look at the subcompact car, that is the smallest car sold in the United States, that segment. It's less than 1% of the market.
Years ago, Daimler made a push to sell the Smart 4.2, a tiny car by any definition. It was cheap and cute, and it could fit sideways in a parking spot. But it was discontinued after about a decade of disappointing sales. At the K-Car meetup, I asked everyone here who loves their tiny car, what do you think? Could they take off? Could America embrace small, cheap, and slow? Andy Creedon sums up the majority view.
If I had to bet, I would bet against it, unfortunately.
But Dan Kobayashi is more optimistic. His truck is useful, it's affordable, and he points out everywhere else in the world people like to have small cars. Why not here? Camila Dominowski, NPR News.
And elsewhere on today's show, the Trump administration is considering military options in Iran.
The big question is bombing the right tool here? Or is the better tool, for example, dropping more of those Starlink units so that the protesters can go talk to each other, communicate with the outside world?
The New York Times correspondent David Sanger tells us what's at stake as President Trump weighs his options. You can find that story at hereandnow.org.
Listening to News 88.7.
Telling the stories of the University of Houston, this is a UH Moment.
University of Houston chemistry professor Judy Wu has received a nearly $2 million grant to tackle one of chemistry's most challenging questions. How does light transform the structure, energy, and reactivity of molecules?
That energy can be used for a lot of useful applications, such as, for example, light harvesting materials or light-induced therapeutics like drug delivery system.
The 4-year project aims to develop conceptual frameworks for mapping the reactivities of molecules in their short-lived, high-energy states.
We're basically creating blueprints, like little models that experimentalists in many fields can take and try it in their specific system. So the broad stroke application is to know how to convert light into chemical energy.
Wu's team uses computer-based small data chemistry to explore fundamental questions about storing and releasing chemical energy in light-activated molecules.
We're discovering new ways of thinking about the interaction between light and chemistry and how to make harnessing that energy more efficient.
Telling the stories of the University of Houston. This UH Moment is made possible by Houston Public Media, News 88.7. Listener supported from the University of Houston.
Did you know your gift to Houston Public Media could go twice or even 3 times as far through your employer's matching gift program? Many companies will match the charitable donations of their employees, and some even match gifts from retirees. That means your support for trusted news and programs could have double the impact for our community. Find out if your company participates at houstonpublicmedia.org/match.
Support comes from Roth Rothko Chapel, presenting the 31st MLK.
You know, I listen to NPR while I drive because it's stream safe. When I drive virtual truck off stream, I usually listen to music, but listening to music on stream makes YouTube very upset.
And from
so I listen to NPR, and you kind of get a vision into the left. You see my trying VTuber saw my VTuber as a MAGA hat, so
funding for Here
strange.
and Now comes
like,
from
yeah,
the listeners of WBUR Boston.
You get a vision into the left,
creator
and I think it's funny. Hey, did you know you can get your employer to also donate money to us?
MathWorks, accelerating the pace of discovery in engineering and science. Learn more at mathworks.com. And Loomis Sales, for 100 years, committed to helping investors achieve their financial objectives, combining in-house research and risk management to create tailored investment strategies for every client. Learn more at loomissales.com.
This is the Engines of Our Ingenuity from Houston Public Media News 88.7.
Today's Signs of the Times. The Honors College at the University of Houston presents this program about the machines that make our civilization run and the people whose ingenuity created them. Lately, I've been thinking about time and space. I mean very specific times and very specific spaces. Right now, if you're in your car, you're locked down for the duration of your commute, and unless you're a terrible driver, your eyes are fixed on the cars ahead of you. From this common situation emerges a new space of meaning, the bumper. Do you think the guys who first designed the bumper realized it would become a place to send messages? And yet, this is one of the most common spaces to send signals in the public sphere. The messages range from angry political statements to declarations of pride in our children, religion, or team. The small dimensions of the space limit the wording in such a distinctive way that the bumper sticker has become a genre in its own right. What characterizes the spaces that interest me is that they're not originally designed for sending messages. They emerge gradually from the evolving fabric of modern life. Think of the space above the seats on a subway. When you're riding along there in the big city, you don't want to stare at the person across from you. Someone figured out the space just above that person is ideal for posting messages. In that constrained and awkward moment, you'll read anything. So there you are studying every word about diabetes or teenage pregnancy. We'll read anything posted in an elevator for the very same reason. Otherwise, we'll stare at the flashing floor numbers like we're waiting on a winning lottery ticket. And you gentlemen know how closely we'll peruse whatever's posted in the men's room. The academic field of semiotics spends a lot of time thinking about sign systems. You can read many a complex semiotic analysis of how society shapes spaces of meaning. But on average, we don't spend much time thinking about how peculiar these emergent spaces are, or how they came to be. They're simply a part of our social reality. Take, for example, the t-shirt. This cotton garment was originally underwear. It still is, in fact. By design and definition, it is the very opposite of fancy. For centuries, people tried to send signals about their status or convictions through their clothing. But in the age of the t-shirt, we have perfected the art of shouting to the world any number of carefully crafted messages. Sometimes they're simple statements, sometimes they're ironic or hilarious, but around the world, the t-shirt has become the body's billboard. And here's the paradox. Because the t-shirt is easy to mass produce, it's become the simplest way to proclaim your individuality through distinctive or even provocative messaging. Now we have a new emergent space of meaning, the gas pump. Someone's figured out you have to stand there tending the hose with nothing else to look at but the rising price of gas. So now there's a digital screen ready to show you the weather or the news, anything to keep your mind off the cost of fuel. These spaces have become such a part of our lives that we don't think about the precise conditions that bring them into being. So I have an idea for a bumper sticker that'll express my new obsession. It'll read, "What did you expect? It's only a bumper." I'm Richard Armstrong at the University of Houston, where we're interested in the way inventive minds work.
A transcript of this Engines of Our Ingenuity episode, number 2836, is online at uh.edu/engines. Additional episodes are available by podcast.
I'm Stephen Dubner, host of Freakonomics Radio. Every week, Freakonomics Radio explores the hidden side of, well, everything. From the economics of sleep to when is the best time to rob a bank. So tune in next time on Freakonomics Radio.
Freakonomics, Mondays at 9 p.m. on News 88.7.
If you're chugging orange juice or sipping chicken soup to battle colds, the benefits are likely minimal.
A really, really big take-home message from everything about immune health is don't take anyone's word for it. Even someone who's won 2 Nobel Prizes.
Why too strong an immune system might be detrimental, and surprising remedies that actually work. That's next time on Think.
You can listen to Think is coming up tonight at 10 o'clock.
Support comes from Theater Under the Stars and the Broadway musical $1 Million Quartet, featuring the music of Elvis Presley, Johnny Cash, Jerry Lee Lewis, and Carl Perkins, February 17th through March 1st at the Hobby Center. Tickets at tuts.org. Support comes from Visit Galveston, presenting Art Week Galveston, a week-long celebration of visual, performing, literary, and other arts in Galveston's Cultural Arts District, January 19th through 25th. More at visitgalveston.com.
Funding for Here and Now comes from the listeners of WBUR Boston and your NPR station, and from Viking, dedicated to creating travel experiences for the thinking person, with programs designed for cultural enrichment on board and on shore. Learn more at Viking.com. And City Space Productions, WBUR's creative studio for custom podcasts that tell a brand's story to ignite engagement, reach new audiences, or enhance customer connections. WBUR.org/creative studio.
From NPR and WBUR, I'm Peter O'Dowd in Phoenix.
I'm Indira Lakshmanan in Boston. It's Here and Now. Can a 6-year-old boy be possessed by the spirit of a corgi he met in a dog park? That's the enigma at the center of Sarah Levine's hilarious new novel, The Hitch. It's narrated by Rose, an artisanal yogurt entrepreneur, vegan eco-warrior, and secular Jewish feminist who criticizes everyone
Forgot about
in
how
her
poorly
life
brakes work
except for her
when you're
beloved
this
nephew,
heavily
Nathan.
loaded.
Rose relishes Nathan's weekly visits, but she disapproves of how her brother and his wife
Hold
are
on, I'll be
rearing
right back.
him.
I think
So she's
I think
ecstatic
my
when
new toy might
Nathan's
have just
parents
arrived.
reluctantly agree to let him stay with her for a week while they're on vacation. Things start to go awry when Rose's Newfoundland kills a corgi named Hazel. Nathan insists that Hazel's soul has leapt into his body and hitched onto his soul, and he starts to act accordingly. The New York Times calls The Hitch winningly zany. Kirkus says it's destined to become a cult classic. The book is out this week, and author Sarah Levine joins us now. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
I want to know what gave you the idea of a boy possessed by a small herding dog made famous as the favorite breed of Queen Elizabeth II?
You know, it's hard for me as a writer to remember the exact moment an idea arrives. I can tell you this, that when I was pregnant, people would always ask, do you want a boy or a girl? And I'd say, I don't care what the kid is so long as it's a reader. It was a joke, but there was kind of a touch of truth in it. The baby wasn't even born, and already I was trying to shape her in my own image. But the corgi, this is really to me a love story, or a book about the impasses to love. And the corgi, or I should say the hitch refers to Hazel, the corgi who hitchhikes on Nathan's soul.
Right.
But the book, I really wanted the book to talk about love, unconditional love, but never using that jargon. Rose wants to love her family, but she doesn't know how.
Right. Well, it's interesting because she's a lonely person, but she's so judgy of everyone. And that makes it hard. And you talk about wanting to impose one's views on one's children. And that's really interesting to me, because when she finds out Nathan is going to come stay for a week, she throws herself into decorating his room without really understanding what's important to a 6-year-old boy. She spends weeks researching color swatches from a fancy paint company and settles on a color named Webbit, which apparently means spider web in England, white with a hint of gray. And when he comes into the room, he says, says, it's gray, like the color of sweat socks. Meanwhile, she's paid someone like Michelangelo to paint this place up, and she doesn't understand what the boy really wants. So are you trying to say that Rose is sort of like you, who wanted to impose yourself on your daughter before she was born?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think it was bonkers that I already, pregnant, baby not even born, and I was having this sort of fantasy of what she would be. She would be a reader like me. And I think that part of what is so challenging about parenting is you want to help your child grow and be the best version of themselves, but sometimes you get in the way, and it's really hard to figure out, how much do I shape and how much do I stand back and how do I honor who the person is? I think Rose really does love Nathan in her way, but she has a kind of fantasy about who he is and a fantasy about what the week will be like. Mm-hmm. Then when the corgi gets in there, or, when he tells her there's a corgi in me, she's really hard pressed to love him because she thinks I got to get this dog out. And that to me, I mean, the corgi was a really fun character to work with, a sort of shapeshifter character, but it was also a metaphor in a way for all the things, all the energies in our children that are kind of unruly or inconvenient that I would often observe myself and others trying to rout out.
Yeah, well, when Nathan tells his aunt that Hazel's soul has entered his body, at first she thinks he's processing trauma over having witnessed a dog killing another dog. But then we discover that Hazel has really distinct personality traits, and she knows other people's thoughts and experiences that there's no way Nathan could know. So at that point, we start to wonder, is Hazel real? Is that something that you have an answer to, or did you want it to be a mystery for us as readers?
I deliberately built the novel so that there were a few places where divergent interpretations are possible. I think, it can be read as a ghost story. I think it can be read as a psychological study. And I'm really interested, I'm not trying to be coy, but I'm really interested to see how people read it.
Let's talk a little bit more about Rose. She's sort of unable to let other people just be happy doing what they do. And in fact, she's made millions as an artisanal yogurt entrepreneur whose company is called The Cultured Cow. But now she regrets it all after reading a study about what cows' farts are doing to the environment, and she's turned vegan. She's prickly and kind of an unlikable protagonist. This is a woman who seems to be unhappy in her own skin. Talk more about that.
Yeah, I'm glad you clocked that. I think Rose is unhappy. In a way, she's having a midlife crisis. She's having a midlife crisis even before the corgi shows up. She had to grow up kind of early because her parents died young, and she had just been in college out east and moved back to the Midwest to take care of things, including her younger brother. She managed to graduate college, help her brother graduate college, and she put him through podiatry school. When he got married, impulsively, she felt she helped him buy a house. She does these things, but she also doesn't let anybody forget she did these things. Mm-hmm. But I think she grew up kind of fast and is the kind of woman you might see profiled in a business magazine as a successful CEO. Mm-hmm. But it's all external things, and she has not explored her inner life. I feel like she's somebody who's been in survival mode and has been performing and just struggling to keep afloat. Mm-hmm. And now she's at the point where she has to shift. The coping skills she had as a young woman are no longer going to serve her.
She's also really funny, though, and, it comes across to the reader as satire. Could you read us from page 29, where her brother asks her to go with him to a sort of beer garden, an Austrian restaurant that his wife has recommended, but is not at all the kind of she Brooklyn-like place that Rose would want to go to herself?
Victor ordered a winter beer, Brocknodel, and Wiener Schnitzel while I scanned the menu, which read like an insult too subtle for Victor to catch. Did he know 99% of Austrians voted in support of the union with Germany? Reluctantly, I ordered the house salad with schnitzel and asked to hold the schnitzel. The waitress cast doubt on my choice. We're famous for our schnitzel. And Vienna was famous for its Jews before Anschluss. Sigmund Freud, Karl Kraus, Victor Adler, Arthur. I'll have her schnitzel, Victor said hurriedly. Just put it on the side. Please and thanks, he called out to the waitress's back.
So it almost made me think of a Woody Allen movie. She raises up victimhood a lot and self-righteousness, but in a very, very funny way. I do think that you had a sense of wanting us to sympathize and empathize with her as well, right? I mean, she is the hero of this story, and we get the sense that she deeply wants human connection.
Yeah. I hope people find something to like in her. I think she's likable because she's funny, even when she doesn't know she's being funny. I think she's, like you said, truly lonely and wanting to connect to her family. And all of us have that tendency at times to slip into judgment. And these are such judgmental, polarizing times now. She's obviously an extreme version of it. I don't know. I've just spent so much time wondering, when is zeal good? I'm a person with strong opinions. And I think, how do you know when you're showing an appropriate amount of passion for a cause and when you're just being a jerk?
Well, I don't want to give away the ending because it is poignant, and to me it was a bit sad. You know, it isn't a comedy all the way through. What do you want readers to take away from your story?
Yeah, it isn't a comedy. It's a blend of horror, comedy, and metaphysics, I think. And I guess I want the reader to laugh, but I'm also hoping that the reader will maybe think about the hitchiness in their own life, by which I mean the places where they get hung up on conditions or judgments, and it makes them hard to love and engage with other people as they are without needing to change them.
Sarah Levine's new book is The Hitch. It's out this week. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me on.
You're listening to Here and Now.
We know you value Houston Public Media. That's why you're listening right now. Take the next steps and become a new member of the station you rely on. Every gift makes a difference, and what matters most right now is supporting the station that brings you the news and information you rely on. It only takes a few minutes to make a big difference. Join as a new member today at HoustonPublicMedia.org/donate or call 888-909-0887.
I want to make a movie about this.
The Arts Hour brings you film.
The themes in it are so far ahead of their time.
Books.
The detail is amazing.
Art.
There's all the personal stuff.
Theatre.
Lots of singing and dancing and colours.
Music.
The dance floor is made for dancing.
And everything in between.
I want it to be exciting.
That's the Arts Hour with me, Nikki Beatty. I really identified with it. From the BBC.
The Arts Hour, Friday nights at 9 on News 88.7.
Funding for Here and Now comes from the listeners of WBUR Boston and your NPR station, and from MathWorks, creator of MATLAB and Simulink software for technical computing and model-based design. MathWorks, accelerating the pace of discovery in engineering and science. Learn more at mathworks.com. And Road Scholar, a nonprofit educational travel provider for adults offering programs in more than 100 countries and online. Learn more at roadscholar.org/learning.
It's Here and Now. We tend to think of history as something written in a speech or fought over on a battlefield, but sometimes it shows up in the corner of an old envelope. In 1847, the U.S. government produced its first official stamps, and they weren't just important for sending mail. They're among the first mass-produced images in America. As part of this year's 250th anniversary of the United States, we're bringing you 25 objects that tell the story of this country with the help of the Smithsonian Institution. Dan Piazza is chief curator of philately at the Smithsonian National Postal Museum. Dan, to mispronounce words. Did I say that right? Philately?
You did. You got it right.
All right. Well, I'm impressed. That's a new word for me. We're here to talk about the first official stamps in U.S. history. This is a 5-cent stamp from 1847 featuring Benjamin Franklin and a 10-cent stamp with George Washington's face on it. What's the story of how they were born?
Well, the first postage stamps in the world had been issued about 7 years earlier in the United Kingdom. and they pictured Queen Victoria. And there was a congressional committee on the post offices and post roads that was keeping an eye on how the use of postage stamps was developing in the British post office. By 1847, they decided to adopt it in the U.S. Now, of course, having a monarch would not be appropriate for a U.S. postage stamp, so they went with two of the most popular and revered figures in the country's history, and that's Benjamin Franklin, who also happened to be the country's first postmaster general, and George Washington, the first president.
Well, this was the mid-1800s. People were writing letters long before then. How did Americans send mail before these stamps?
That's right. I mean, people were writing letters going all the way back, to the first colonists in the 1620s and 30s. But before the introduction of postage stamps, it was the recipient who paid for the letter rather than the sender. And there were a number of reasons for that. Transportation was very slow. A lot of it was by ship, and a lot of ships sank. People did not want to pay the postage for letters that might never arrive at their destination. And so it was considered more convenient for the recipient to pay on the other end upon delivery. But that created a lot of problems for the post office. What if the person doesn't want the letter or doesn't pay for it?
Junk mail.
So the idea of a postage stamp was that the sender could prepay the letter up front. That meant the post office always got paid to carry mail. That brings the costs way, way down and allows the volume of mail to increase. So the introduction of stamps and the convenience of that stored value of postage that a stamp represents really made it easier than ever for people to write, and the volume of mail just explodes.
You know better than I do, stamp collecting is a serious business. I'm sure these stamps are incredibly rare. Are there many out there? And what would they be worth?
They're not as rare as you might think. And they were printed in millions of copies, and they were the first. And the first of everything is innovation, right? It gets saved. So these stamps survive in the millions. People kept them as souvenirs, but as with all collectibles, and now we're getting into the realm of stamps as collectibles rather than as postage for the post office. It's all about condition and usage and destination and all those sorts of things. So a really beautiful copy of the stamp on a really scarce usage, is very attractive to collectors and can cost quite a lot of money.
Forgive the question. Did people in 1847 have to lick the stamps to put them on the envelope?
They did, and there are some reports in newspapers at the time that some people didn't quite understand that, and so they tried to use them, I guess, almost like stickers and press them on the envelope. And they wrote to the post office complaining that they kept falling off the envelope or they didn't wet it enough. And so, they might attach the stamp, but by the time they drop it in a mailbox and it gets to the post office, maybe the stamp is gone.
Well, they were ahead of their time.
That's right.
Stamps or stickers today.
And in the UK, when the first postage stamps came out in 1840 with Queen Victoria on them, a lot of people wrote amusing little poems in the newspaper about, licking the Queen's head. So this was a whole new experience for people in the 1840s.
Well, listen, this is just fascinating. I just want to leave you with this. Why do you think these stamps are so critical to telling the story of the United States?
I think postage stamps really, in a very small space, capture what a country thinks is important about itself at any point in time, whether those are important people or places, events, and how what is important and what gets commemorated changes over time is really important too. So these stamps, besides being works of art, collectibles in and of themselves, they're little snapshots of what a country thinks is important about itself at the time they were issued.
Dan Piazza is Chief Curator of Philately at the Smithsonian National Postal Museum. Dan, it's been a pleasure speaking to you about these 5-cent and 10-cent stamps from 1847. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And don't forget to tune in every Wednesday from now till July as we present 25 objects that tell the story of the United States with the help of the Smithsonian Institution. Here and Now is a production of NPR and WBUR. Peter O'Dowd in Phoenix.
I'm Indira Lakshmanan in Boston. It's Here and Now.
Funding Funding for Here and Now comes from the Mehrotra Institute at Boston University, hosting the Is Business Broken podcast, featuring conversations with academics, industry leaders, and politicians. More at ibms.bu.edu.
Hi, I'm Manoush Zamarodi, and our world is changing so fast. On the TED Radio Hour, we invite innovators, researchers, and activists to unpack those changes with us.
Just about all companies are becoming technology companies or technology-enabled companies.
Listen to the TED Radio Hour from NPR every week for conversations that will deepen your understanding of our changing world.
The TED Radio Hour, Tuesdays at 9 p.m. on News 88.7.
It's a tough time to be a young person just entering the workforce, sending your first job applications out and hearing back nothing.
Most of them, you didn't even get a response. It was just like waiting to see. Even a rejection would have been nice.
I'm Amy Scott. The challenges of being a 20-something dreaming of a 9-to-5. That's next time on Marketplace.
You can hear it this evening. It's on at 6:30.
Support for Houston Public Media comes from listeners like you and from St. Luke's Health and the St. Luke's Foundation, supporting clinical excellence, compassionate care, and a healthier future for all. More at supportstlukes.org.
Clear night tonight. We'll get down to about 40, and then tomorrow looks nice again. Lots of sunshine. The high getting up to 58. It's 68. And this is your NPR station, KUHF, Houston. News 88.7, a service of the University of Houston. It's 2 o'clock.
Thousands of people have lost their jobs at the State Department. How is the agency faring as it continues to shape the U.S. agenda abroad? From WAMU and NPR in Washington, this is 1A. I'm Jen White. Today on 1A, our .gov series continues. Today, the State Department had now dismantled USAID. After layoffs and firings of key agency personnel and diplomats at state, what are the consequences for foreign policy? Plus, it's been nearly a year since the Trump administration cut thousands of foreign assistance grants and awards, effectively ending USAID. Epidemiologists at Boston University estimate over 700,000 people in developing countries have died as a result. Who's addressing the biggest humanitarian crises in the world now? That's after this news.
Live from NPR News, I'm Lakshmi Singh. President Trump's Mideast envoy Steve Witkoff says a new phase of the administration's peace plan for Gaza is now underway. NPR's Frank Ordonez reports Witkoff laid out the next steps.
As they move into the much-anticipated Phase 2 of President Trump's 20-point plan to end the war in Gaza, Steve Witkoff says the sides will transition from the ceasefire phase to demilitarization, governance, and reconstruction. But Witkoff warns that the U.S. expects Hamas to, quote, comply fully with its obligations, including return of the final deceased hostage. Palestinian parties are in Cairo to discuss the formation of the Palestinian body that will temporarily administer Gaza and take over from Hamas. Hamas says it's ready to hand over administrative affairs. The negotiations on disarmament have not officially begun. Franco Ordonez, NPR News, the White House.
The State Department is pausing immigrant visa processing for 75 countries in an escalation of a crackdown on legal pathways to come to the United States. The full list has not been released, but includes Somalia, Russia, Afghanistan, and Brazil, to name a few. NPR's Jimena Bustillo reports the suspensions will start January 21st.
An immigrant visa is a specific category of visa given to people who want to permanently live in the U.S. The State Department's pause comes after the agency promoted a record number of revocations. In 2025, they revoked more than 100,000 visas. The 4 leading causes for these revocations were overstays, DUIs, assault, and theft. This new step of pausing visa processing also comes as other parts of the administration have completely halted immigration processes for those on the list of countries with travel restrictions to the U.S. The move generally further limits legal avenues of travel into the country as the Trump administration increases scrutiny for those who are here without or with legal status. Jimena Bustillo, NPR News.
Denmark is resisting a U.S. takeover of its territory, Greenland. But Foreign Minister Lars Løkke Rasmussen said following
I bet this guy's a little nervous
Vice
with me
President
sitting
J.D.
behind
Vance
him. I
and
think this is the
Secretary
guy I
of
hit
State Marco Rubio
earlier.
today, the kingdom is willing to explore what is doable.
The Kingdom of Denmark has already stepped up our own contribution by committing additional funds for military capabilities. Not dog slates, but ships, drones, fighter jets, etc. And we are definitely ready to do more.
In a social media post hours before the meeting, President Trump said NATO should help the U.S. control Greenland. Otherwise, Russia or China would. He adds anything less than U.S. control would be unacceptable. Denmark's foreign minister says what Trump is proposing is, quote, totally unacceptable. This is NPR News.
Live from News 88.7 in Houston, I'm Gail DeLauder. Interim Harris County Attorney Jonathan Fonbon says Governor Abbott doesn't have the authority to take over Harris County's elections. Abbott made the threat after State Senator Paul Bettencourt said more than 100 county residents are registered to vote with post office boxes.
There are all these checks along the way to make sure that we don't get to the point where a voter who doesn't reside in the right place votes in that place. And like you said, when we talk about fraud, I think of is a voter who's either not allowed to vote, casting a vote, or who's allowed to vote but not allowed to vote in a certain place.
Fonbon made his comments on today's Hello Houston. World Cup matches here in Houston are 5 months away. FIFA says it could be the biggest World Cup ever. News 88.7's Michael Atkinson says Houston alone could see an economic impact well over $1 billion.
Imagine the work that goes into hosting the Super Bowl like Houston did in 2017. Now multiply that times 7. That's the level of work it takes to host Houston's 7 matches in the World Cup, according to Houston Host Committee President Chris Canetti.
We have to set the table and make sure that the venue is ready for the party that's about to come, and then FIFA brings the party.
That includes things like preparing NRG Stadium, working on safety and security, and ensuring people have access to transportation to the matches. In order to do that, the host committee has several projects in the works, including investing in a walkable path from East Downtown to NRG Stadium. I'm Michael Atkinson, News 88.7.
And we'll have more on what Houston's World Cup committee has planned. That's in News 88.7 in depth at 3:44. University of Houston police are looking for an armed man who held up a student near the Accessibility Center last night. The victim told police the suspect pulled a gun and demanded she send him money via Cash App. She says the gunman fled after he took her wallet and cell phone. Clear skies are in our forecast this evening. Overnight low expected near 41 degrees. Tomorrow, sunny skies, high near 58. I'm Gail DeLauder, News 88.7.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include the estate of Joan B. Kroc, whose bequest serves as an enduring investment in the future of public radio and seeks to help NPR be the model for high-quality journalism in the 21st century. This is NPR.
This is 1A. I'm Jen White. The recent U.S. military operation in Venezuela and ousting of President Nicolás Maduro is raising questions about the foreign policy priorities of the Trump administration. It's been almost 2 weeks since the capture of Maduro and the climax of a months-long pressure campaign against Venezuela. The country's interim president, Delcy Rodriguez, says she's open to reestablishing diplomatic ties with the U.S. The State Department has sent diplomats to Venezuela as the next phase of U.S. involvement there begins. Meanwhile, the State Department itself is facing major changes, including layoffs and firings of agency personnel and diplomats. And it's not the only agency in the U.S. foreign policy space that's seeing a shakeup. In February of last year, the Trump administration cut thousands of foreign assistance grants and awards, effectively ending the U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID. The agency employed around 10,000 staff members before it was dismantled. By February of last year, fewer than 300 of those employees remained. According to one estimate, more than 700,000 people in developing countries died last year due to the cuts at USAID. This week, we're back with the second round of our series, .gov, where we look at how federal agencies are changing under the current administration. Today, we turn to the State Department and USAID and what the changes at those agencies mean for diplomacy. Let's start with the State Department. Joining me now is Kevin Whitaker. He's a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. That's an international affairs think tank. He was the U.S. ambassador to Colombia from 2014 to 2019 under the Trump and Obama administrations. Ambassador Whitaker, welcome to the program.
Pleasure to be here.
Also with us is Akbar Shahid Ahmed. He's the senior diplomatic correspondent for HuffPost. Akbar, welcome back to the program.
Thanks, John.
And Max Bergman joins us. He's the director of the Europe, Russia, and Eurasia program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. He worked in the State Department from 2011 to 2017. Max, welcome.
Great to be here.
And we want to hear from you. What questions do you have about the State Department and its operations? If you've worked in Foreign Service or at USAID, what do you want others to know about the impact of that work? Email us at 1a@wamu.org. Akbar, it's been almost 2 weeks since the U.S. military strikes in Caracas and the capture of Nicolás Maduro. He was then indicted in the Southern District of New York. What's happened since then?
So we've seen now the Trump administration make increasing claims that they're going to be, in their terms, running Venezuela. For President Trump and those closest to him, that seems to focus a lot on Venezuela's oil reserves. This is a country that's home to the biggest oil reserves in the world, but it's tapping a very, very small amount of them. I mean, in 2025, relative to about 20 years earlier, Venezuela was producing less than half of what it did at its peak. The Trump administration is arguing they're going to not only bring Venezuela to a point of greater oil production, they're going to use that oil revenue to enhance the quality of life of the Venezuelan people, many of whom have suffered under an oppressive regime for years. And they're saying this is a strategic goal to keep Russia and China out of the Western Hemisphere. But all of that, Jen, is complicated by the fact that they have lost so many foreign service personnel, so many technical experts. Who is going to be doing this running remains very much an open question for Secretary Rubio and the President.
Ambassador Whitaker, prior to the attacks in Caracas earlier this month, the U.S. military conducted 35 boat strikes, killing at least 115 people since early September. Tensions between the U.S. and Venezuela were not new, but how did you react to the intensification of the U.S.'s posture towards Venezuela?
You know, with respect to the boat strikes, it wasn't at all clear to me what the strategic goal was. The fentanyl was mentioned. Of course, those boats don't carry fentanyl. If it was meant to stop cocaine trade, certainly that was one of the axes of transport, but there are many others, so it was a little hard to understand. I do think the better conclusion, though, is it was really meant to put pressure on the Venezuelan government.
What makes foreign policy unique when it comes to Latin America, Ambassador?
That's a big question. We have a long history of involvement in Latin America, and Latin Americans have long memories of what they view as abrasions of their sovereignty, occupations of nations in Central America and the Caribbean, and taking over customs houses, something that was very common back in the early 20th century. So there is a continuing concern about an overweening U.S. presence, something that we worked very hard to try to balance out.
And you were one of the longest running ambassadors to Colombia. So how does that history, or how did that history affect your work?
It's unique because Colombia is probably the least anti-American of those countries. But what we tried to do is emphasize partnership and our willingness to work in collaboration with all kinds of actors, governmental, non-governmental, civil society, in order to work towards shared goals. And we were having considerable success in a number of countries, particularly in Colombia.
So, Max, when Ambassador Whitaker describes an approach to diplomatic relations that focused on partnership, what do you see coming out of the State Department now, the foreign policy arguments they're making to support U.S. actions in Venezuela?
Well, I think this is an administration that's not focused on partnership. It's not focused on working with allies and partners or really other countries in the world. It's, I think, has a much more 19th century approach to the world, where it's about
extraction. It's about trying to get others to give up more. This is not an administration about win-win cooperation. A lot of the post-World War II American-led international order, as we describe it, was about win-win cooperation. It was about lowering trade barriers so we could trade with each other, and that would, create a rising tide that would lift all boats. This administration has a very different outlook, and it's about getting countries to give us resources. It's about getting countries to lower their trade barriers while we raise ours. And this is, I think, deeply problematic for especially many in Europe and many of our allies and partners around the world. And it's an administration, that few, I think, really want to work with closely. And we haven't really seen the effects of that, but we're beginning to see the world begin to adapt to this and trying to work around the United States as much as possible.
So, Akbar, what does that mean for restarting diplomacy with Venezuela, especially after the ouster of Maduro?
I think, Jen, so much about the boat strikes, which I'm so glad you mentioned, because that kind of encapsulated where this broken diplomatic process is so relevant, right? So I've been closely covering the State Department's legal office, for example, where I've heard that career personnel, even those who are left after the gunning of the department, are really feeling watched. They're not feeling that they can give their best advice. And this is a kind of broader morale problem across the department where career technical experts, people who've been in their roles for decades in some cases, are feeling political appointees from the Trump administration are to an extent almost looking for a reason to push more people out. So what that means for a country like Venezuela, for instance, 28 million people coming out of a period of just immense poverty, immense deprivation, and political strife. How do you kind of build those bridges? And are you having frank discussions on the inside? What it looks like is Secretary Rubio, a couple of folks at the White House, some folks in his personal office are sitting around and talking about this. But that's not an approach that's going to win over, as Max said, broader allies and wins, whether that's Europeans or other Latin American countries. And it's a question that we saw come up in President Trump's White House meeting on Friday, where he tried to bring in these American oil companies and said, we're going to pull you in, you're going to come into Venezuela, and it's all going to be a big win for us. The head of ExxonMobil said at that meeting, Venezuela is, quote, uninvestable, right? So there is a fundamental reality that you're going to run up against here that maybe in a previous iteration, a State Department expert would have told you before you went out and started making these big claims. But right now, given the sense in the department of a culture of silence, looking over people's shoulders, and the sense that the cuts aren't done, that foreign policy expertise and that advice is not happening in the normal way.
Well, Ambassador Whitaker, again, we're talking about layoffs at the State Department, a loss of expertise. How are you thinking about that given the administration's foreign policy agenda?
Our colleagues at the Department of Defense back in the day, loving acronyms as they do, they talked about the four tools that the United States has to influence international events. DIME, an acronym, diplomacy, information, military and economic tools. And with the gutting of the State Department has been described, the diplomatic tool is greatly degraded. The Trump administration has implemented enormous cuts in terms of the information, the Agency for Global Media, which puts out our message out into the world. On economic side, part of that is economic assistance through USAID, which doesn't exist anymore. So we have greatly narrowed tools in terms of how we can affect realities abroad. The military option is still there, and it seems the tool of choice in the current moment with respect to the Trump administration.
Max, we've heard from Secretary of State Marco Rubio. He's described some of the U.S. plan for Venezuela. Part of that is trying to stabilize the country. How does the State Department typically work with other countries on that stabilization?
Well, the State Department has had a lot of experience in trying to work in post-conflict regions and countries, and it has a huge cadre of people with a lot of expertise in economic affairs and managing government relations. And there's been, for the last, not just this administration, but really since the global financial crisis of 2008, a real gutting of the State Department, a loss of personnel. But what the State Department would be doing would be you would be sending people in to work with people on the ground to try to get infrastructure up and running and other things like that. And what we don't see from this administration is sort of any direction there. And maybe that's a good thing, given perhaps we've been overstretched in the past.
Well, let's pause here for just a moment. We're with Max Bergman of the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Also with us, Akbar Shahid Ahmed, the senior diplomatic correspondent from HuffPost. And we heard from Kevin Whitaker. He's a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, and he was U.S. ambassador to Colombia from 2014 to 2019. Ambassador, thank you for speaking with us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
At 2:18 on a Wednesday afternoon, you're listening to 1A on your NPR station, News 87. And on the freeways for the first time in 2026, a flatbed with a too-tall load has hit the Houston Avenue overpass on eastbound I-10, the Katy Freeway. Everything is shut down right around Studemont. That's where you're being forced off. The back up to Washington, that would be a good exit to take. Then make a right on Washington, on to Westcott after the traffic circle to Memorial as your alternate. 69 Fahrenheit, 21 Celsius right now here at the UH campus in the forecast with ABC Theater 13 Chief Meteorologist Travis Herzog.
Hold on to those steering wheels this afternoon as the winds start gusting 30 to 40 miles per hour. We've got a cold front blowing in, plenty of sunshine, temperatures still warm, close to 70 degrees. But tonight you'll feel the cooling impact of that front as our temperatures drop down into the upper 30s. Lots of sunshine Thursday with a high of 57, and a stronger cold front arriving Friday night could bring our first light freeze or frost of the new year. I'm ABC 13 Chief Meteorologist Travis Herzog for News 88.7.
Support comes from the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, presenting Gyula Kusicha Intergalactic, an exhibition that explores Kusicha's space-age materials and distinctive kinetic art. Now on view. Tickets at mfah.org.
Support comes from Discovery Green Conservancy, presenting Houston's outdoor ice skating rink, offering a wintertime experience for all, surrounded by public art and downtown views. Open through February 16th. More at discoverygreen.com. Support comes from the Houston Automotive Show and NRG Center, highlighting the latest vehicles, off-roading adventures, and automotive technology displays within the combined auto and boat event. More information on schedules, exhibitors, and venue details at automotiveshow.com.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from Made in Cookware. Made in Cookware is crafted by chefs for chefs and designed for restaurants and home kitchens around the world. Their cookware can be found at madeincookware.com. From Melville Charitable Trust, committed to ensuring all people have a safe, stable, and affordable home that allows them to thrive. Information about ways to prevent and solve homelessness is at melvilletrust.org. And from the Doris Duke Foundation.
This is 1A. I'm Jen White. We're discussing the State Department as part of our series .gov, where we check in on our federal agencies 1 year into the Trump administration. We're talking to Max Bergman of the Center for Strategic and International Studies and Akbar Shahid Ahmed, the senior diplomatic correspondent for HuffPost. Like many other federal agencies, the State Department has been roiled by staff shakeups and restructuring. In July of last year, 1,300 agency staff members were fired. In December, 29 senior diplomats appointed by former President Joe Biden were let go. That's according to American Foreign Service Association, the diplomats union. 13 of those ambassadors were to African countries and 6 were ambassadors to Asian countries. Max, before the break, we were talking about this loss of expertise within state. But you were saying that that loss actually didn't start last year. This has been a longer-term issue. Go ahead.
Yeah, so after the great financial crisis in 2008, there was a lot of angst about the budget deficit. There was a Budget Control Act that President Obama negotiated with Republicans in Congress in 2011. And that basically created an environment of austerity in the State Department. When I was in the State Department, oftentimes we had to provide coffee to our, visiting dignitaries from our own sort of staff pot of coffee that we would have with our Keurig cups, because state didn't have the sort of resources for that. So there had been a real sort of gutting of the State Department budget, a lack of growth. And while there was an expansion in the Pentagon's budget, And so the State Department had been in sort of rough shape for a while. But now what has happened, I think, is a combination of things. One is by doing DOGE, by creating an environment in which people can just be fired willy-nilly, it's basically taken away one of the main incentives to work at the State Department, be a government employee, which was job stability, right? You don't make a ton of money by being a career foreign service officer or being a career official at the State Department civil servant. What you get is you get to work for the United States government, do really interesting stuff, and job stability. And if you take away the job stability, these are people that most of the time can go and find other careers, especially if you're young, you're bright, these are the best and the brightest that the State Department recruits. And now, what's the incentive to go work for the U.S. government when, in 4 years, a new administration, you might be fired for nothing that you've done? And so I think we have a real crisis here going forward, where how does the U.S. government just operate when it's going to be really hard to attract people? And that already was a problem, and it's only going to, I think, increase.
Akbar, what are you hearing from your sources inside state about the morale in the agency right now?
I think that point about this being done with no kind of underlying logic or process is
almost took a wrong turn there. Got really lucky that there was a stop I could turn around.
When the mass firings happened last summer at State, and one person said to me, quote, "It's not a reform of the State Department so much as it is just a broad degradation of function." And that was really how this was perceived. I mean, the way that people were removed was not necessarily, oh, is your job really important? Is your expertise unique? It was quite random in many instances. People were just between assignments, and so they were suddenly removed, or there were alterations to the process by which government employees could be removed, which again gets to Max's point about these jobs becoming far less stable. I think there's a real fear right now at State of what does the future look like for us because of this lack of being able to pull in talent, and this kind of broader argument that diplomacy doesn't matter, expertise doesn't matter. And I think that that's something that's quite important to question and probe, because yes, you can look at the track record of US foreign policy in the last 20 or 50 years and say there have been major gaps, major flaws. What does the world look like when you have even less deliberation, even less expertise and context coming into decision making? I think there's a real potential for an even more dangerous world. So,
when we talk about those senior diplomats who were let go in December, these were ambassadors to African countries, ambassadors to Asian countries. What does that mean for U.S. relationships with those countries, Akbar?
There's a double whammy there. One instance of that is just the clear sense that certain parts of the world are just being treated as irrelevant, which in a global landscape where we don't know where mineral resources are, where future competitions are going to happen, and where kind of this US-China rivalry is going to play out, that's not necessarily the smartest gamble. You don't know when you might need an ambassador somewhere. Also, this has affected the way that other officials, talking to foreign officials, how they perceive the State Department. And that has a number of effects, Jen, because it's not just if I have my number one top priority issue, do I want the president's attention or do I want Secretary Rubio's attention? Sure, but there's issues 5 through 25, whether it's nuclear weapons, whether it's arsenals, whether it's climate change, whether it's global food security, whether it's pandemics. And if you don't know as a foreign official who your counterpart at the State Department is to talk to about that, or if they will ever even be taken seriously, then you are looking at the US and thinking, how do I even sort of grapple with this behemoth? And that's kind of the long-term ripple effect. I'll also note with those ambassadors, that got to the arbitrariness of this. Some of those folks, all of those folks who were removed recently, got their ambassadorships in the Biden era, not because they were chosen by Joe Biden specifically, they had reached that point in their tenure. So there's this sense of just because you happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time in your career, you're being targeted.
Right, because we're talking about career foreign service officers here.
Precisely, right. And many of them will probably never get an assignment again. So their careers have now been curtailed at a point when they really weren't planning to. These are not political folks at all.
Max, I want to talk for a moment about cuts to the cyber and tech departments at State. What are the types of layoffs we're seeing there tell you about what the State Department sees as the biggest threats to national security?
I mean, it's sort of confounding because, cyber, I think, is probably an area where there is need for a ton of diplomatic effort and energy. It's a new field, a new area, and it's one where previous administrations had begun to sort of build up the expertise within the State Department to begin to talk to other countries about cybersecurity, but also there are no rules right now in cyberspace. There are very few, and beginning to try to create an international context where countries shouldn't do certain things, and that is one aspect of what the State Department does, is to try to protect U.S. interests, to try to create sort of international standards. Maybe just one other quick point is the State Department is an intelligence agency, and I can make an argument that it's probably the most important intelligence agency. We love spy movies and finding stuff out that you're not supposed to having secrets and espionage. But what the State Department does, it goes and talks to everybody all the time. That's what people do on the ground. And you can find out a lot more when you oftentimes go and are in a meeting or you're having a beer or a drink or a lunch with a foreign official or a foreign actor, and just doing it openly. And that's what the State Department does. And then they write cables back. And when WikiLeaks released, thousands and troves of U.S. government secrets and cables, it was a travesty. But one of the things you saw is, man, how effective State Department diplomats were in really reading and analyzing the situations on the ground. Real deep insight that's super valuable for the U.S. government, for our intelligence agencies, for our senior officials that are making decisions. And when you start just sort of, cutting off our eyes and ears, that's what the State Department is. Our ability to engage the world and think about the world gets really diminished. And I think that's one of the things that we've been seeing over the last 15 years, and it's only going to accelerate.
So Max, part of what I hear you saying is that the loss of expertise, the lack of investment in the State Department actually makes it more difficult for any administration to implement its foreign policy agenda. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, and it's also really hard for U.S. businesses, because if, let's say, you're a U.S. business trying to do a deal, a government contract in a country, you rely on the engagement with the U.S. embassy there, that then has contacts and connections, that knows how that place works. And so when you're also really hurting and undercutting U.S. business globally when you begin to really kneecap the expertise of the State Department, and especially in areas where we're new fields, we're focused on critical minerals now. That's in places where U.S. companies oftentimes don't have a lot of experience operating, and really rely on the diplomats on the ground to open doors for them to be able to know how the place operates. And that's another hugely important aspect. And also, when diplomats go into a room and say, hey, you should really work with this U.S. company, it carries a lot of weight on the ground. And so if we're not there, that's going to hurt us economically as well.
Well, Akbar, there's a lot happening right now. President Trump is pushing for control of the Arctic island of Greenland. Foreign ministers from Denmark and Greenland will meet with Vice President J.D. Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio today. We're also keeping our eyes on Iran. Activists say more than 2,500 people have been killed there in anti-government protests, and the State Department is asking U.S. citizens to leave the country. What are you watching most closely, whether it's our relationship with our European allies, or potential U.S. action in Iran, or what happens next in Venezuela? There's a lot happening right now.
There's a lot, and I'll add to that, of course, the mounting humanitarian crisis in Gaza, which is getting worse as the second phase of the ceasefire doesn't extend, and concerns about Sudan and other places. I'm thinking so much about Iran because some of the offices that were most heavily hit when Secretary Rubio enacted these cuts at the State Department were the democracy promotion, the human rights offices, the offices that had contacts with civil society in Iran, an extremely difficult place to be in touch with, where now we may be seeing one of the worst crackdowns on protesters in living memories. Upwards of tens of thousands of protesters potentially have been attacked and killed. And the State Department had people who were tracking Iran, had cultivated those source networks, could maybe bypass even the unprecedented internet crackdown that the Iranian regime has now put through. And in this moment where DC is in a very complicated position trying to work out how do we deal with the potential shift in the regime or potential instability, that expertise just isn't at the State Department. That's what I'm tracking, because I look at that as Iran has sort of been a fixation and a major concern for U.S. administrations, Republican and Democratic, for decades. At this crunch moment, which could be the most important moments for its future in 40 years, you don't have that bench of Iran cadres, people who worked on previous nuclear deals, for instance, with Iran, people who even have relationships in the neighborhood around Iran, and that kind of expertise. What's been surprising is the State Department sometimes brings in people, and is still bringing in some people who formerly have worked or have those relationships. That's different from having that on the payroll and in the discussion. I think, again, that's a loss any administration would be thinking about when it faces a major unexpected crisis like this one.
And Max, briefly, from you, what are you watching most closely?
Well, I'm watching right now, and today you have the foreign and defense ministers of Greenland coming to meet with the president and Marco Rubio. Look, the president's designs on Greenland, frankly, don't make any sense from a U.S. national security perspective. During the Cold War, we had 6,000 troops there and more than 15 bases. Right now, we have one with 150 people. If we're that concerned about the security of Greenland, which frankly, I'm not sure we need to be, we can just always expand our presence there. The Danes are saying, what do you want to do here in Greenland? If you want to have more troops, you can. And this, I think, is really a potentially volatile situation, because this is NATO territory, and the president has designs on seizing the NATO territory, the territory of a NATO ally. And if he does that, it's the end of NATO, and it's really the end of the transatlantic relationship, which we've worked to cultivate for the last 80 years. So that really puts us in a new era. And just to bring it back to the folks at the State Department, imagine you're at the State Department, you spent your entire career working to strengthen transatlantic relations, the NATO alliance, and suddenly you're now told to pursue a policy that is totally antithetical to that. And this is putting career officials really in a tough bind. They've worked their whole career, and now they're being told to do something that would have huge, I think, detrimental consequences for the United States and the transatlantic relationship. And this is just, an impossible situation that a lot of career officials are going to be put in.
Well, that's Max Bergman. He's the director of the Europe-Russia and Eurasia program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. He worked in the State Department from 2011 to 2017. Max, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much.
And Akbar Shahed Ahmed of HuffPost is still with us. And now let's bring in Andrew Natsios. He's the director of the Scowcroft Institute of International Affairs and an executive professor at Texas A&M University. He was the administrator of the U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID, from 2001 to 2006 during the George W. Bush administration. And he joins us now to talk about that agency. So I'd love to first hear your reactions to what you've been hearing about changes at the State Department, especially as someone who headed USAID. What was the relationship between the two agencies?
Well, first, I was a diplomat. Actually, after I left AID to teach at Georgetown, I was President Bush's envoy to Sudan. For a limited period of time, I was a diplomat. And so I've seen it from both perspectives. And the gutting of the destruction of aid or dismantling of aid, I think, has been an absolute abomination from a humanitarian standpoint, but also in terms of our national security. But that's equally true for the State Department. I think a lot of very able career people have been laid off under ridiculous circumstances. They're not. I am a conservative in the old order, not the populist sense of what that means. The budget deficit is the most serious crisis facing the country, and we're not dealing with it. Neither party is. And the notion that cutting AID and state is going to deal with a budget deficit is patently ridiculous. That's what Musk said when he was doing. 75% of federal spending is entitlement programs and mandatory spending like debt service. 13% is the Defense Department. Everything else is that last 13%. You can't cut the budget deficit by cutting the State Department aid. It's less than 1% of federal spending. And yet they were selling that to the American people. And all they did was to damage our instruments of national policy. One of the three fundamental purposes of the federal government is national defense, in our relationship with the world, according to the U.S. Constitution, in terms of appointing ambassadors. You know, our first aid program goes back to Alexander Hamilton ran our first aid program when he was sent by John Adams to help write the Constitution of the new Haiti Republic after the slave revolt. So these programs are not new. They were institutionalized after World War II. And then Jack Kennedy created USAID in 1961 by executive order and then by statute. So
a long history there, but let's pick up our conversation in a moment. We're talking to former USAID Administrator Andrew Natsios. He's also a professor at Texas A&M University. And Akbar Shahid Ahmed is with us, Senior Diplomatic Correspondent at HuffPost. We'll be right back.
At 2:38, you're listening to 1A here on your NPR station, News 88.7. Eastbound I-10 Katy Freeway about 2.5 hours ago, a semi hit the Houston Street overpass, the first incident of its kind at that location this year after happening more than 70 times in 2025. All but one left lane is blocked right now as the operation continues to fix that problem, and traffic is going to be stalling from T.C. Chester. You can take Washington to Westcott to Memorial as an alternate.
What will the ousting of Nicolas Maduro from Venezuela mean for the future of the oil industry?
If you're benefiting the U.S. economy, it's probably to the detriment of someone, potentially Venezuela.
I'm Juana Summers. We go to Texas, which has the most refining capacity in the United States, for answers on all things considered from NPR News.
And we'll have local and statewide news with Gail DeLauder to go along with that coming your way until the hour 3.
On the next Fresh Air, Marco Rubio once called Donald Trump a con artist. Now as Secretary of State, he's defending policies he once opposed and overseeing deep cuts to the very foreign aid programs he once supported. New Yorker staff writer Dexter Filkins will join us to talk about his new article on Rubio's political transformation. Join us.
It's Fresh Air, 8 o'clock this evening, followed by This American Life at 9 on News 88.7.
Houston Public Media, in partnership with Texas Southern University, brings to you The Vibe, R&B, hip-hop, and neo-soul, music that resonates with all ages. The Vibe on 88.7 HD3 and on the Houston Public Media app.
Support for Houston Public Media comes from the Clarion at Brazosport College, featuring the Westerly's Brass Quartet on January 16th at 7:30 p.m. Tickets and more information at brazosport.edu/Clarion.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from Legacy Box, dedicated to preserving family memories, old tapes, films, and photos, with the goal of spreading joy of reliving the moments that matter in the new year. More at legacybox.com. And from the Walton Family Foundation, working to create access to opportunity for people and communities by tackling tough social and environmental problems. More information is at waltonfamilyfoundation.org.
Back to our conversation in a moment, but first we'd love your help with our next installment of our .gov series. On Thursday, the Department of Education. Over the past year, the Trump administration has launched hundreds of civil rights investigations into K-12 schools and colleges, frozen billions in federal research funds, and begun dismantling the department. We'll look at how the goals of the Education Department have shifted and explore what the nation's school system could look like without it. If you work in education, we'd love to hear from you. How, if at all, have changes to the Department of Education affected your work? Tell us your story at 855-236-1212. Maybe you're a parent of a child in school from K-12 to higher ed. How has your family been affected by changes at the Department of Education? Call us at 855-236-1A1A or leave a message with our app, 1A Vox Pop, and we'll get to your thoughts on Thursday. Now back to our discussion about the dismantling of USAID. We're here with former USAID Administrator Andrew Natsios. He's also a professor at Texas A&M University, and Akbar Shahid Ahmed, the Senior Diplomatic Correspondent at HuffPost. We heard from Umar, who emails, I am a witness to USAID's work across an entire lifetime, first as a recipient of humanitarian assistance and a conflict survivor, and later as a USAID civil servant in D.C. I have seen humanitarian aid at work up close and under the most difficult conditions imaginable. I have walked through the ruins of Mosul, Iraq, when the fumes of bombing still lingered in the air. I worked alongside youth in Benghazi, Libya. I trudged through trenches issues of water and mud and flood and tsunami-affected communities. I know what it means to be in need, and I know what it means when someone extends a hand of support. That is what USAID did. Akbar, take us back to the dismantling of the agency and the argument the Trump administration was making at the time for why they thought it was necessary.
The argument the Trump administration made was that effectively other countries and the global system had taken advantage of America in their telling. So they argued, we need to roll back these resources, we're going to reinvest them at home. But again, the way this was done undercut that narrative in so many ways. The person who was brought in to really reorganize humanitarian assistance was a man called Jeremy Lewin. He'd come in from Elon Musk's DOGE agency. He was a 28-year-old with no government experience. This person remains now the senior official still in charge of humanitarian assistance at the State Department, overseeing what's left of U.S. aid. And what's incredible, Jen, is my understanding is that in his role, after he slashed all of aid, slashed its contracts, now being in the job at State, he's quietly bringing back some of those contacts, some of those people, some of those experts, because there's a recognition that the U.S. needs that role. But the Trump administration's argument was, it's time for other countries to step up. I think Omar's message gets to a really important point that the perception of America helping out in the world was not just about soft power. It was also tacitly a recognition that the U.S. is a driver of a lot of global affairs and to some extent a driver of a lot of conflict. So if you think about Gaza and Sudan, the biggest humanitarian crises right now, that's U.S. partners, Israel and the United Arab Emirates, that are helping fuel those conflicts. And there's always been a kind of tacit recognition that while the U.S. maybe is worsening those contacts in some ways for its own strategic objectives, there's another side of America. There's a side that is bringing people out of refugee camps, that is dealing with these man-made crises and disasters. And talking to USAID personnel now, these are people who have worked in contexts we just can't imagine. I mean, being shot at, being on the phone with partners who are on the brink of death. Many of those people still have not landed because they have such specialized techniques. So when you talk about that stat you mentioned of the 700,000 people who've died potentially because of the cuts to U.S. aid, that number is immense and will keep growing because there's no way to kind of plug back in that humanitarian expertise. And so there's a real perception again of America was to blame for those losses. Well, and that'll, right.
Yeah, let's go back to our voicemail box.
We were supporting anti-corruption efforts around the world, which of course is critical. Corruption is a key threat to American security, to our way of life, and really to the safety, security, and prosperity of people around the world. It undermines everything, our institutions, our economic growth, our prosperity. It gets in the way of people getting the medicines they need, and it removes public resources that really should be going to the public good. And we were making great progress around the world on this issue, working with citizen groups and governments and going after the kinds of illicit finance and money that funds cartels that bring fentanyl into our country and that traffic people. And all of it was taken apart without any regard to the consequences here at home or around the world.
That was Jen, a former USAID employee. Let's hear a bit from another former USAID employee now. Project Resource Optimization was created by laid-off aid employees. It's a website that matches donors with humanitarian aid projects that lost funding from the cuts to the agency. Robert Rosenbaum is one of those former employees, and here's what he told us about the work his group is doing.
We spent the last year steeped in the data of thousands of terminated programs to find those that we believe will save the most lives per dollar spent, which we then make publicly available in what we call our urgent and vetted list. Projects include humanitarian programming in war-torn countries like Sudan, Syria, and Yemen, where these organizations were running some of the only standing health clinics, offering services like pre- and postnatal care for newborns, treating children with acute malnutrition, and providing basic medical interventions for children with diarrhea or malaria. In all cases, these projects had their funding committed from the U.S. government and saw that funding evaporate overnight, leaving millions of people without access to critical health and humanitarian services. Philanthropy simply can't cover the massive gaps left behind by USAID, but I do believe it has helped.
Thanks for that message. Andrew, I'd love to hear your reaction to what we heard from Robert there, particularly on the type of work aid was doing.
Well, I didn't even realize I was the aid administrator. We set up, when I was the administrator, a supply chain Nations, the World Bank, ministries of health in the developing world, particularly in Africa, that did not have a lot of supply chain capacity, bought into this massive contract. They shut the whole thing down. It supplied 10,000 health clinics in sub-Saharan Africa alone, and health ministries and international organizations. They just shut the whole thing down. That means antiretrovirals for HIV/AIDS, malaria medication, TB medication, immunizations for measles. The whole thing just collapsed. Now, they said they granted a waiver for it, but the reality on the ground is they've disrupted all of the delivery systems. I don't think they knew what they were doing, frankly. And what's interesting now is Susie Wiles, the chief of staff to President Trump in the White House, did this interview with, I think it was Vanity Fair, and she said, we know the wonderful work that AI did around the world. She said she was shocked by what they did to aid. This is the chief of staff to the president. I think they let Elon Musk and the head of OMB, Russell Vogt, just do whatever they wanted to do without any knowledge of the consequences. Atil Gawande is a professor at the Harvard School of Public Health. He went out to Africa to look at the consequences of these cuts. He wrote an article for it. He's a very well-known health scientist, and he said at least 700,000 people died last year, 2/3 of them children, because they stopped immunizations in many areas of Africa now because of this. So
I want to get to this email from Jennifer, who says, please talk about the USA-Africa relations under the current administration. The only things that are making news are the U.S. bombing in Nigeria and the White House signing of a DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, peace treaty that hasn't lasted. The U.S. appears to be punishing our allies in Africa by cutting off critical funding to support HIV/AIDS and other medical interventions and food for people in the enormous refugee camps. Visa applications for Tanzanians wanting to come to the U.S., for example, have been cut to almost zero. What does this mean for our medium and long-term relations with African countries? Akbar, what are you hearing?
Jen, that's certainly an impression that the Trump administration does not want people from Africa coming to this country, whether to visit or to stay or then live. We've also seen, in addition to the countries that were mentioned in that message, the Trump administration pick a fight with South Africa, pushing this idea that South Africa has discriminated against its white population, and in turn overlooking a lot of the U.S. relationship with what is one of the richest and most influential countries on the continent. And then, of course, there is Sudan, where the Trump administration inherited a crisis and civil war, but hasn't reined it in any significant way.
We're talking to Akbar Shahed Ahmed of HuffPost. Also speaking to us, former USAID Administrator Andrew Natsios. Now, USAID's operations were merged with the State Department in July, which is where the remaining few hundred USAID employees now work. The agency's 5,200 contracts also shifted to the State Department. And we heard from one of those employees. I'm a former USAID employee, and I'm one of the lucky ones, quotes there, who made it over to state, at least temporarily. People may think everything with humanitarian and development aid is fine because we just merged with state. I'm here to tell you from the inside that it's not fine. USAID had its challenges, but we were effective and learned from our past mistakes. They broke all of the infrastructure and scaffolding of our work, and now they expect us to put it back together with duct tape. There will be retribution for me saying this. It is clear that we former USAID folks are not trusted, but as a registered Republican and a Christian, I can safely say that this hostile takeover of USAID functions does not reflect my values. I only hope that I can do a little good from the inside where I can. Akbar, what's your understanding of what's happening inside the State Department right now for those workers who essentially shifted from USAID to state and the work they're charged with doing?
There are certainly a lot of extremely qualified and well-intentioned people who did stay in that role, right? Who came over from aid and now working in what's called the Office of Humanitarian Assistance at the State Department. And I think there is a lot of goodwill to try to support them, particularly in working on contexts like Gaza, contexts like Sudan. But I think there's a real sense that It's important to remember USAID was not so much an implementing agency all the time. It was a partnership agency. It managed the US relationship with various other groups and actors in these countries. So if you're talking about small nonprofits in sub-Saharan Africa, if you're talking about major charities like Catholic Relief Services, those relationships have really stagnated, Jen, and there's a real sense from other humanitarian groups that they can't trust the US anymore. So rebuilding that kind of relationship is going to be extremely hard. For a number of those agencies, including like the World Food Program at the UN, there have even been legal concerns. Has the US met its legal obligations as a donor? So if you are those officials trying to maneuver what's left of USAID from within the State Department, you're in a very tough position. You feel that your colleagues in the Trump administration don't trust you, and the people you need to work with on the outside don't necessarily trust you. And all of that to say, what is the direction, right? I mean, there's no guarantee that tomorrow or a week from now, Elon Musk or someone else in President Trump's inner circle doesn't again flag this issue of humanitarian assistance, leading to another round of chaos, another round of what people feel is political retribution and a kind of illogical approach. So you're sort of stuck in a Groundhog Day and to an extent trying to do what good you can within a limited number of hours and days.
We spoke to former Ambassador Larry Andre Jr. last year following the shuttering of USAID. He worked at the State Department for 33 years before retiring from foreign service in May 2023. He was the ambassador to Somalia, Djibouti, and Mauritania. Here's part of my conversation with him. There's a narrative emerging that USAID operates unilaterally, that they are operating independent of U.S. interests. How would you respond to that?
Not in my experience, and if that had happened and the director of USAID in that country was unresponsive to my counseling, then that would become the former director of USAID in that country. We work as a team, as a whole of government team.
We got this email from Christopher who says, I'm really worried about the implications for our reputation and the loss of soft power related to USAID's destruction. The gutting of USAID was pure sadism, but it will come back to haunt us. Is USAID's authorizing legislation still on the books? What do your guests think about the possibility that USAID could be reconstituted under a new administration? And so, Andrew, I want to come to you first because as we heard there from former Ambassador Larry Andre Jr., there was this cooperative approach, both hard power and soft power when it came to USAID and the State Department. Do you think there's the possibility of the agency in some way, shape, or form being recreated?
Brian Atwood, the head of AID under Bill Clinton, and I wrote an op-ed that was published last week in The Hill in which we advocated a new federal department at the cabinet level where we not just take what used to be an AID, but all of the other, there are 12 other AID programs spread across the federal government, put them all in one place, and which is the way AID originally was created to do, and reconstitute it. The statute still exists. They have not. There was an attempt by some of the far right in the Congress, but the Republicans, the great bulk of Republicans, particularly in the Senate, but also half the Republicans in the House support AID. The House Appropriation Committee for Foreign Ops just reported a bill out and restored many of the cuts. For example, to the democracy and governance programs, they zeroed them out completely in the administration. They've restored a lot of that money. Whether it's been given final approval by the House and the Senate, we don't know. That's an upcoming vote. I think it may be today. And so the reality is that Congress does not support what the president did. And I might add, the Republicans didn't support it. They didn't say much at the time because I think there was a steamroller approach to all of this. But I think there's a good chance that AID will be reconstituted in different form. But the Foreign Assistance Act still exists. It's still on the books.
Well, lots more to watch over the coming year. That's Andrew Natsios. He's the director of the Scowcroft Institute of International Affairs and an executive professor at Texas A&M University. He was the administrator of the U.S. Agency for International Development from 2001 to 2006. And Akbar Shahed Ahmed. He's the senior diplomatic correspondent for HuffPost. Thanks to you both. Today's producer was R.V. Getty. This program comes to you from WAMU, part of American University in Washington, distributed by NPR. Our .gov series continues with a look at the Department of Education. Hope you tune in. I'm Jen White. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk more soon. This is 1A.
I wonder if NPR does these kind of shows during the Democrat administration. I honestly never listened to it during Biden, so I don't know.
And from Capital One, offering their premium travel card, Venture X. What's in your wallet? Terms apply. Details at CapitalOne.com. From Ooma, a cloud-based phone service for any size business, with an automated virtual receptionist, video meetings, and other features to connect to customers and coworkers anywhere. At Ooma.com/NPR. And from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, at macfound.org.
We're a minute and a half away from 3, and we're at the start of All Things Considered on a Wednesday afternoon here on your NPR station, News 88.7. Eastbound I-10 Katy Freeway working to clear the mess from a semi that with an oversized load that hit the Houston Street overpass about 3 hours ago. First such incident of 2026. Traffic is backed up in the area, and if you wish to avoid it altogether, you can try either Memorial or Allen Parkway, or if you're feeling extra adventurous, the eastbound side of the North Loop as an alternative.
Support comes from Rothko Chapel, presenting the 31st MLK birthday observance. We Got Us, Health and Care Beyond Capitalism, on January 15th at 6:30 p.m. More information at rothkochapel.org.
Support also comes from members like you and from Ellen Benninghoven and Dr. Michael Schaefer, proud sponsors of Houston Matters with Craig Pillman, every Monday through Friday morning at 9 here on News 88.7. Sunset at 5:43. It'll be clear overnight with a low around 40. Kind of breezy as well as it is currently. Northwest winds up to around 25. We have north winds up to 30 right now here at the UH campus. Tomorrow's sunrise at 7:18. It will be sunny with a high around 58. Right now it's 69 degrees here at the UH campus on your NPR station, KUHF Houston News 88.7. A service of the University of Houston's 3 o'clock.
The expiration date of this nearly 50-year-old system is quickly approaching.
In Iran, anti-government protests have been met with violent repression from the authoritarian government. The U.S. is weighing military action.
For Wednesday, January 14th, this is All Things Considered from NPR News.
I'm Juana Summers.
And I'm Elsa Chang. A key federal agency abruptly canceled billions of dollars in grants.
That money supported mental health and addiction response efforts.
These are boots-on-the-ground services that people rely on for behavioral health care.
Also, a look at the fight to rein in high prices for prescription drugs.
In examining where we are today, we're pretty much in line with the last, few years.
And Muhammad Ali is being honored with a U.S. commemorative postage stamp.
We speak to the stamp's designer after this news.
Live from NPR News, I'm Lakshmi Singh. The Trump administration shows no sign of dropping its desire to take over Greenland. After a meeting today with Vice President J.D. Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio, the Foreign Minister of Denmark, of which Greenland is an autonomous territory, says fundamental differences remain. Here's NPR's Jackie Northam.
Danish Foreign Minister Lars Løkke Rasmussen says the meeting at the White House followed what he called a number of remarkable comments by President Trump on wanting to acquire Greenland, the semi-autonomous region of Denmark, even if by force. Rasmussen agrees that Arctic security is important, but not at any price.
And of course we have to respond to this. The big difference is whether that must lead to a situation where the U.S. acquire Greenland, and that is absolutely not necessary.
Rasmussen says Denmark is open to an increased U.S. presence in Greenland. He says during the Cold War, the U.S. had 17 military installations there. Now it has 1. A high-level working group is due to meet again in a few weeks to continue talks. Jackie Northam, NPR News.
The administration plans to stop processing visa applications from foreign applicants it suspects will require public assistance to live in the U.S. The State Department has identified 75 countries, including Russia, Iran, Afghanistan, and Somalia. Democratic Senator Alyssa Slotkin of Michigan says she is under investigation after she participated in a video with 5 other lawmakers urging members of the military to refuse illegal orders. A spokesperson for the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia declined to confirm or deny the inquiry. NPR's Sam Greenglass reports.
President Trump called the video message treasonous and amplified a social media post calling for the 6 Democrats to be hanged. Slotkin said she received 1,000 credible threats and a bomb scare.
Truth doesn't matter, facts don't matter, and anyone who disagrees with him becomes an enemy, and he then weaponizes the federal government against them. It's legal intimidation and physical intimidation meant to get you to shut up.
The Pentagon this week is moving to censure another one of the 6 lawmakers, Arizona Democratic Senator Mark Kelly, a retired Navy combat pilot. Sam Greenglass, NPR News, Washington.
A space crew will soon be homebound. In about an hour, the team's expected to undock from the International Space Station and splash down off California's coast early in the morning. NPR's Nell Greenfield-Boyce reports it's the first time NASA's cut short an ISS mission for medical reasons.
NASA officials have stressed that the unidentified astronaut is stable, but say they need to do the kind of full diagnostic workup that's only possible on the ground. In a video beamed down from the station earlier this week, everyone on board spoke on camera, and none appeared obviously ill. Nell Greenfield-Boyce, NPR News.
You're listening to NPR News.
Live from News 88.7 in Houston, I'm Gail DeLauder. As Governor Abbott calls for a state takeover of Harris County elections, local officials say the county has made strides in recent years to improve the process. University of Houston political science professor Nancy Sims told this morning's Houston Matters the county has taken extra steps to ensure fair elections.
When they put the control of the elections back under the county clerk, passed a series of bills, built a new election center at the county that's got cameras that watch the ballots from every minute they move, the elections have been better.
Governor Abbott pointed to Houston public media reporting that more than 100 voter registrations were linked to private post office boxes. Interim Harris County Attorney Jonathan Bonbon said in a statement the governor doesn't have the authority to control county elections. Former Harris County Attorney Christian Menefee and former Houston City Council member Amanda Edwards met in Humble last night. It was the sole debate of the 18th Congressional District special election runoff. 88.7 politics reporter Andrew Schnatter says flooding was a big issue.
Edwards stressed her experience responding to Hurricane Harvey's flooding while on Houston City Council. She said she would push for full funding and training for FEMA.
But also that we are bringing home the bacon, infrastructure dollars in a direct allocation so that our region can keep our families and community members safe.
Menefee stressed his work forcing the state to provide Harris County with its fair share of federal disaster relief after Harvey.
I'm going to fight every single day to get FEMA restored, to make sure that money is coming directly to our communities and not having to pass through Greg Abbott and Austin.
Early voting in the runoff election runs January 21st through 27th. Election day is January 31st. I'm Andrew Schneider, News 88.7.
And we'll have more on the special election coming up in our in-depth report at 5:44. Clear skies this evening, low near 41 degrees. Sunny skies tomorrow, high near 58 degrees. I'm Gail DeLauder, News 88.7.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Jarl and Pamela Moe, focusing on civil liberties, foster youth, public radio, and the arts. And the Public Welfare Foundation, committed to advancing transformative youth and criminal justice reforms.
From NPR News, this is All Things Considered. I'm Elsa Chang in Culver City, California.
And I'm Juana Summers in Washington. We begin today with a conversation about Iran. Anti-government protests over the last few weeks have been met with violent repression from the authoritarian government. That has left more than 2,500 people dead, according to the U.S.-based human rights activist news agency. NPR, I'll note, has not been able to independently verify that number. The U.S. is weighing military action in response. When there's big news from Iran, we often reach out to Jason Rezaian. He was the Washington Post correspondent in Tehran in 2014 when he was imprisoned by the Iranian government and later released during the nuclear deal negotiations. He's now the director of press freedom initiatives at the Washington Post, and his op-ed this week is titled, "I've waited for this electrifying moment in Iran for 10 years. Jason Rezaian, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me, Juan.
I want to start with this. You've written that for the first time since leaving Iran in 2016, you're now allowing yourself to feel hope that one day you might return. Tell us what feels different about this moment from moments of protest that you've seen in the past.
I think what we see, Juana, is that the velocity between protest movements in Iran is quickening. If you think back to 2009 and the Green Movement that followed the contested re-election of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, then there were protests in 2017, 18, 19 that were much more regional in scope around economic discontent. Then in 2022, the Woman Life Freedom Movement that was arguably the biggest protest movement in Iran. To date, everyone was supporting each other in this very basic demand that we want a freer, more open society where people's rights are protected and guaranteed. And at the same time, we want a better financial future. And I think the regime has not been able to respond to those very clear demands. They don't have a plan to do so. And at this point in time, it seems like the expiration date of this nearly 50-year-old system is quickly approaching.
I want to ask you, Jason, historically as you see it, where has the U.S. gone wrong when it thinks about change in Iran?
I think we've gotten it wrong for a lot of different reasons. But one of them is that we've rarely followed through on the things that we have promised to do. We talk a lot right now about the internet shutdown and blackout, and it's not just the internet, it's even landline telephones. We haven't been able to communicate with anybody inside Iran since a week ago today. Iranians should be able to access the internet, and there are ways to keep people online, right? Congress needs to vote on that. White House needs to put in an executive order around it. And also finding touch points with Iranian civil society. The truth is that there are very few people in Washington or other global capitals that have relevant recent experience inside of Iran. And there are quite a lot of dissidents who have either left Iran in recent years or are still on the ground and willing to communicate their positions. We should be leaning on them to better understand the dynamics inside the country and how we can be most supportive.
Yeah, I want to push on that a little bit. I mean, I've heard you made the argument, and you make it in your piece as well, that the U.S. needs to stop listening to the same voices in Washington and begin to build bridges with people inside Iran. If there's one shift in thinking you would like to see from U.S. policymakers right now, what would that be?
I've always been somebody who's incredibly pro-engagement. I don't think of diplomacy as a weakness. I think of it as a strength, especially when you wield the type of firepower and influence in the world that the United States does. And I think talking to our adversaries is very important. That doesn't mean acquiescing to their demands or giving in to them. And I think, engagement with the Iranian regime right now, especially around the nuclear program, would be a mistake. I think our focus should be centered on the people of Iran and their aspirations. A stable Iran with an open economy and an open society that has the territorial integrity and is in the same borders that we know right now would be in the region's interest and would be in the United States of America's interest.
Jason, this week marks 10 years since you were released from prison. You were forced to leave Iran. When you look at what is happening there right now, how does that anniversary shape how you're taking in and watching this moment?
Well, it's hard for me to wrap my head around the fact that my wife and I have been out of Iran for 10 years. It's incredibly heartbreaking to me for her that she was very unceremoniously jettisoned, exiled from her homeland and hasn't been able to return and may not be able to do so earnestness and the clarity with which they're standing up and demanding a new way forward. And at the same time, the brutal repression of the Islamic regime to kind of silence those demands, it's an incredibly mixed set of emotions. I'm proud, I'm exhilarated, but I'm scared about the loss of life, and also about the very real possibility that if this regime falls, there's no guarantee that something better would automatically replace it. And I think that is a very strange thing to say after all of these years. I had hoped and wished we'd be much further along these conversations 10 years ago than we actually are.
Jason Rezaian is the director of press freedom initiatives at The Washington Post and the paper's former correspondent in Tehran. Jason, thank you.
Thanks, Mara.
The Trump administration sent shockwaves through the country's mental health and addiction response system today. A key federal agency abruptly canceled federal grants that public health experts say amount to about $2 billion. This money supported frontline responders and health programs nationwide. NPR addiction correspondent Brian Mann broke this story and joins us now. Hi, Brian.
Hi, Elsa.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. How did you even learn about these cuts?
Yeah, last night I started getting texts and emails from sources who work on the front lines helping people in severe addiction or with mental health illness. They'd started receiving these termination letters, which are effective immediately, and they came out of the blue. And these people were just voicing devastation. I spoke with Ryan Hampton. He runs one program educating people about how to save lives after a drug overdose. His group was stripped permanently overnight, he says, of roughly $500,000 in grant funding.
We're going to have to scale back and cancel a lot of our overdose prevention work that we do in the state of Nevada and across the country. It's catastrophic for us.
And again, it's not just addiction. Mental health groups that support people in independent living, do wellness checks, they're also being cut. The U.S. operates with kind of a crazy quilt of nonprofit groups and local agencies grappling with all of these really difficult social challenges. And now I'm hearing from group after group people saying their budgets have just been blown up. The National Association of County Behavioral Health and Developmental Disability Directors sent a letter to members saying they believe over 2,000 grants nationwide, totaling more than $2 billion in federal funds, are affected. And that $2 billion estimate matches what I'm hearing from other sources.
Wow. Well, has the Trump administration explained why it even is making these cuts?
The agency that sent these letters is the U.S. Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, known as SAMHSA. They're part of the Department of Health and Human Services. We've reached out through multiple channels asking for clarification or details from them, asking why this happened without advance notice, and we've had no answer. NPR has been able to review some of these termination letters, and they all say pretty much the same thing. They say the Trump administration wants to focus on, and I'm quoting here, promoting innovative programs and interventions that address the rising rates of mental illness and substance abuse. And they say the programs being defunded are not in alignment with the Trump administration's agenda.
Not in alignment. What does that even mean?
Yeah, in executive orders, President Trump has been making the case that the U.S. needs a new approach to helping people. One example, he wants to scrap support for programs that focus on housing first. That means getting people off the streets into safe housing, even if they're not yet ready to quit using alcohol or drugs. The Trump administration is also pivoting away from programs that focus on harm reduction, things like clean needle exchanges and wound treatment programs that help people avoid the worst health outcomes of drug use. Administration officials have spoken repeatedly about focusing on this kind of treatment and recovery first, but people I've been talking to today say the administration is defunding the old safety net without building this new one first. Andrew Kessler is a consultant who works with mental health and addiction groups nationwide. He thinks a lot of people who are really sick are going to lose help.
These are boots on the ground services that people rely on for behavioral health care. These are sometimes, quite often, really acute conditions. People need help right away. And if you say, come back once we get this sorted out, odds are pretty high that that person's not coming back.
Again, we've asked the Trump administration for comment on these concerns with no response. Programs all over the country scrambling now just to keep their doors open. And I want to say, Elsa, people I've been talking to say many of these programs have been saving lives. One program, the distributed free naloxone that helped people reverse fentanyl overdoses. Now those programs are going away.
That is NPR's Brian Mann. Thank you so much, Brian.
Thanks, Elsa.
It's coming up on 3:18 on a Wednesday afternoon, and you're listening to All Things Considered on News 88.7. I'm David Pittman. Out on the freeways eastbound I-10, that's going to be jammed up before Patterson. An oversized big rig at the Houston Avenue overpass shortly before noon, and a couple of right lanes are still occupied with the effort to clear it. Part of the construction along that area, by the way, is intended to fix that recurring problem, but it probably will not be finished until sometime in 2028. 69 Fahrenheit, 21 Celsius right now here at the UH campus. In the forecast with ABC 13 Chief Meteorologist Travis Herzog.
Hold on to those steering wheels this afternoon as the winds start gusting 30 to 40 miles per hour. We've got a cold front blowing in. Plenty of sunshine. Temperatures still warm, close to 70 degrees. But tonight you'll feel the cooling impact of that front as our temperatures drop down into the upper 30s. Lots of sunshine Thursday with a high of 57. And a stronger cold front arriving Friday night could bring our first light freezer frost of the new year. I'm ABC 13 Chief Meteorologist Travis Herzog for News 88.7.
I'm Jeremy Hobson. Next time on The Middle, from tariffs to DOGE cuts to a nationwide immigration crackdown to the military action in Venezuela. The first year of Trump's second presidency has brought no shortage of change. But beyond the headlines, how are the policies of the Trump administration affecting you personally? We're taking your calls next time on The Middle.
That's tomorrow evening at 8 on News 88.7. In the last 45 seconds, we have been alerted to yet another problem out on the road. Southbound 288 at Airport Boulevard. A wreck taking up 2 miles.
Support comes from Theater Under the Stars and the Broadway musical $1 Billion Quartet, featuring the music of Elvis Presley, Johnny Cash, Jerry Lee Lewis, and Carl Perkins. February 17th through March 1st at the Hobby Center. Tickets at tuts.org. Support comes from Rice University's Master of Interdisciplinary Studies, a flexible degree taught by Rice faculty, balancing life and learning for working adults. Applications due by October 15th. More at gls.rice.edu.
The Trump administration has given drug companies a break on tariffs as part of the overall effort to lower drug prices, but it doesn't seem to be making much of a difference so far. We'll explain why at 3:35.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from Charles Schwab, offering investors choices like full-service wealth management, advice, investing, and trading. Thinkorswim. Learn more at schwab.com. From the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, supporting creative people and effective institutions committed to building a more just, verdant, and peaceful world. More information is at macfound.org. And from the Doris Duke Foundation.
This is All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Juana Summers.
And I'm Elsa Chang. The oil industry has been in the spotlight after the U.S. seized Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro. President Trump met with top oil executives last week, urging them to invest in Venezuela's oil resources. Now, the impact could be mixed for Texas. As Houston Public Media's Natalie Weber reports, the state is home to many oil companies and the most refining capacity in the country.
At a recent protest in Houston, demonstrators criticized the United States' involvement in Venezuela. This is Caleb Kurowski, a local organizer.
I think it's very obvious that this is really only about oil.
President Trump has said from the beginning that this operation is, at least in part, about control of Venezuela's oil. Houston is known as the energy capital of the world, but the impacts of U.S. operations in Venezuela could also reach to other parts of the United States, including parts of Texas from the Permian Basin to cities with refineries along the Gulf Coast. The state produced nearly half of the nation's crude oil in 2024 and accounts for about a third of the country's refining capacity. That's according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration under the Department of Energy. This is Texas Oil and Gas Association President Todd Staples.
Immediately, I think Texas refiners can benefit from the existing production because of the heavy crude that's produced in Venezuela that's not produced in Texas.
A few days after Maduro's capture, Venezuela's state-owned oil company confirmed it was negotiating crude oil sales with the U.S. Rice University professor Mark Jones, who studies Latin American politics, says the oil-rich Permian Basin in West Texas could experience a slight negative impact from these exports.
Where the Permian and Texas more generally will be adversely affected is simply if this drives down overall oil prices.
Oil service companies, which manufacture and repair equipment used for oil extraction and transportation, could see a boost from relaxed sanctions on Venezuela. Jones says many of these companies are based in Houston or have a strong presence in the city.
They all have experience working in Venezuela, and they all are very well positioned to return.
The ability of oil companies to invest in Venezuela, Jones says, depends on the country's stability, and many Americans are skeptical of U.S. involvement there.
If you're benefiting the U.S. economy, it's probably to the detriment of someone, potentially Venezuela.
Some Houston area oil companies have had ties to Venezuela for decades. Chevron is the only major American oil producer still operating there. The company's vice chairman, Mark Nelson, said Friday that the company was prepared to ramp up production. Recently, a judge approved the sale of Houston-based refiner Citgo, which is owned by Venezuela's state-run oil company, to pay off part of the country's debts. International courts have also ordered Venezuela to pay billions of dollars to ConocoPhillips and ExxonMobil. Those remarks later prompted Trump to say he was, quote, inclined to keep the company out of Venezuela. ConocoPhillips CEO Ryan Lance said Friday there will likely need to be conversations about Venezuela's debt and how to finance investments there.
They've already been burned, some of them more than once. They're not going to put good money after bad money.
That's University of Houston energy fellow Ed Hers. He compares U.S. operations in Venezuela to interventions in Iraq and Libya.
There's no reason to think that the Trump administration is going to succeed where these others failed.
For now, major oil companies in Texas and beyond remain in conversations with top U.S. officials. For NPR News, I'm Natalie Weber in Houston.
It's the postage stamp that packs a punch. The greatest of all time, Muhammad Ali, lived his life in the boxing ring, was a civil rights activist, and now Ali's American legacy will be forever celebrated with 2 U.S. postage stamps. Those stamps will be released tomorrow, and the designer of these functional pieces of art is U.S. Postal Service Art Director Antonio Alcala. Welcome to All Things Considered.
Thank you.
Can you just start out by painting a picture? Describe these 2 stamps for us.
Well, the 2 stamps feature a portrait. It's a publicity still of Muhammad Ali looking directly at the viewer, holding his hands up with boxing gloves on, looking with a direct gaze in that traditional boxer pose. And it's juxtaposed with very large type of his name, Ali. And inside the eyes of the letter I of Ali is the word the greatest.
I mean, there are so many images of Muhammad Ali, of the countless photos you could have chosen. What did you hope to evoke with this sort of classical boxing poster photo that you picked?
Yes, well, so that's always the challenge when doing a postage stamp. You're going to pick an image that is hopefully iconic and representative of sort of this figure at the peak of their performance at the height. And so this was Muhammad Ali in 1974, sort of at the zenith of his career. Additionally, Muhammad Ali was quite the entertainer, and so a lot of photos of him where he is making direct eye contact, he's sort of playing to the camera. He can be making a faces or a joke or being playful with somebody who's next to him. So there aren't that many images of him that I could find where he's making that direct eye contact, but that it's also communicating him as a boxer, which was really how he came to be known.
I want to just sort of zoom out big picture here for a second. I am so curious, as an art director, what is at the top of your checklist as you consider how to honor Americans on postage stamps?
We work with a research group, and so if there are holes in my own personal knowledge about the subject matter, they will provide me with additional information. books, websites, etc. to do reading and research on. But then it's somehow you try and find an image or a period that'll speak to the public as to why this figure is particularly significant. It's always starting big and then slowly narrowing it down till you find the one piece you think will work best.
The other thing that I find so interesting, right, when you think about these stamps is the fact that we're talking about relatively small real estate to accomplish something so creative and meaningful. How do artists and art directors like yourselves manage to capture the illustration of people, landscapes, and animals with such great detail and then shrink them down so that they will fit on a postage stamp?
As art directors are continually reminding our artists to look at your artwork down at stamp size or print it out and look at it at actual stamp size. And when you do that, you discover that either there's a lot of detail that becomes lost or elements that you thought were very clear at full size become sort of hidden and missing. So it's a learning process. It's a real challenge. I came to stamp design sort of later in my career, and it was a real learning curve for me to figure out how to adjust to that constraint of the smaller format.
We've been speaking with Antonio Alcala, art director for the U.S. Postal Service and designer of the new stamp featuring Muhammad Ali. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's coming up on 3:29, and you're listening to All Things Considered on News 88.7. Out on the road, still working to clear the big rig that couldn't quite clear the Houston Street overpass on the eastbound side of I-10. The Katy Freeway, 2 right lanes taken up. You're backed up before Patterson. And southbound 288, that's slow and go from Belford for a wreck and airport. Still ahead, FIFA says its 2026 World Cup is expected to be its biggest ever and $1 billion plus event for the city of Houston.
It's as though we're hosting 7 Super Bowls in 21 days.
We'll hear how Houston's World Cup host committee is preparing for hundreds of thousands of soccer fans to descend upon the city. And News 88.7 in depth at 3.
Kristen Stewart is diving into the deep end, directing a feature about a competitive swimmer.
I've been gunning for this forever. I've wanted to do, everything I've done has led me here.
What led the Twilight star to create a much more intimate film? On the next Morning Edition from NPR News.
And we'll have local news with Matt Harrod along with your host Jared Carroll tomorrow morning starting at 5 o'clock. And right after that,
Thursday marks the 25th anniversary of Wikipedia. Hi, I'm Craig Cohen. On the next Houston Matters, we learn about area Wikipedia edit-a-thons Houstonians organize to create and correct articles. Join us
tomorrow morning at 9.
Support for Houston Public Media comes from arbitrator, mediator, and attorney Sylvia Mayer, providing in-person and video conference arbitration and mediation services. More information available at smayerlaw.com.
Support comes from the extended campus at the University of Texas at Austin, helping professionals and organizations upskill, reskill, and stay ahead in an ever-changing work environment. More at extendedcampus.utexas.edu.
It'll be clear and breezy overnight with a low around 40, back up to 58 tomorrow. Right now it's 69 at 3:30.
Live from NPR News in Culver City, California, I'm Dwayne Brown. House Republicans say they're moving to hold former President Clinton and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton in criminal contempt after they defied a committee subpoena, as Claudia Grisales reports.
The House Oversight Committee demanded the testimony as part of its probe into the Jeffrey Epstein case. Chairman James Comer blasted the Clintons after they no-showed for depositions this week.
We will mark up criminal contempt of Congress charges for both Clintons for defying a legal subpoena.
Ahead of those remarks, the Clintons publicly shared a signed letter to Comer arguing the subpoena was legally invalid. They also say they've already cooperated by turning over the, quote, little information they had to the panel. The Republican-led House will vote to approve the criminal contempt charge later this month. Claudia Grisales, NPR News.
The new Venezuelan government releasing political prisoners today, including several Americans. This comes after the U.S. military operation that ousted President Nicolas Maduro. Here's John Otis.
Before Maduro was captured by U.S. Special Forces, the Venezuelan government had been holding between 800 and 900 political prisoners, mainly opposition activists. But the country had also detained numerous Americans to use as bargaining chips with Washington. Now, in what it calls a goodwill gesture, Venezuela's interim government is freeing political prisoners, including some of the Americans. In a statement, the U.S. State Department welcomed the news, saying this is an important step in the right direction by the interim authorities. The State Department did not specify how many Americans had been freed, but the Associated Press reported that at least 5 Americans have been released. For NPR News, I'm John Otis.
You're listening to NPR. Japan's newly elected prime minister says she plans to dissolve the lower house of parliament there and hold snap elections next month. But as NPR's Anthony Kuhn tells us, the vote is widely seen as risky.
Prime Minister Takaichi met with leaders of the Liberal Democratic Party and Japan Innovation Party. They told reporters of Takaichi's intention to dissolve the House of Representatives right after it convenes this month. Takaichi seems to want to leverage her high approval ratings to get more seats in the lower house. Even if she does, she'll still face a divided parliament, as her party lost their majority in both houses in 2 consecutive elections. Takaichi is also stuck in a feud with China over her comments about Taiwan. She could use some help from President Trump on that, but a visit to Washington could be difficult if she's consumed with the elections. Anthony Kuhn, NPR News, Seoul.
A top Danish official says there's a fundamental disagreement with President Trump over Greenland after talks in Washington today. The two sides did agree to create a framework to discuss ways to work through differences. Trump says if the U.S. doesn't take control of the territory, Russia and China will. He can't allow that. Greenland's prime minister says the island territory chooses to remain with Denmark and is boosting its military presence in the Arctic as well as North Atlantic. Stocks finished lower across the board on Wall Street today. This is NPR.
Hello, I'm Frank Billingsley, and our show Hello Houston on News 88.7 airs from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. weekdays, but you can always enjoy our show by checking out the podcast version of Hello Houston wherever you get your podcasts.
And I'm Ernie Manaus, and we also have 2 versions of Hello Houston podcasts you can enjoy. The full version of our show and the commuter cut at around 40 minutes, which you can check out when driving around town.
Listen to our podcast and listen to us live weekdays from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. here on News 88.7.
Tonight on Houston Public Media TVA, Nature presents Tusker, Brotherhood of Elephants. Follow the lives of elephant bulls on Mount Kilimanjaro and get a rare glimpse into the complexity of these giants. Tonight at 7 on TVA.
Southbound 288 just cleared the Reckitt Airport Boulevard. No such luck yet, though, for the 18-wheeler that smacked into the Houston Avenue overpass on the eastbound side of I-10. That is still in progress. It's 3:35.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from Progressive, with small business insurance for protecting a variety of business types with multiple coverage options designed to fit business owners' needs. More about small business insurance is at progressivecommercial.com. And from Procter & Gamble, maker of ZzzQuil, with a range of products designed to relieve occasional sleeplessness to help people fall asleep. Learn more at ZzzQuil.com. This is NPR.
From NPR News, this is All Things Considered. I'm Elsa Chang in Culver City, California.
And I'm Juana Summers in Washington. Every January, drug companies typically raise prices for hundreds of brand-name drugs, but over the last few years, the Trump and Biden administrations have tried to rein in high drug prices. NPR Pharmaceuticals correspondent Sydney Lubkin is here with more.
Hi.
So Sydney, start by telling us how many drug prices went up this year.
Yeah, prices for 872 drugs have increased in the first 2 weeks of 2026, and there could still be more before the month is over. They included drugs that treat cancer, type 2 diabetes, even COVID shots and antibiotics were on the list. That's according to an analysis by 46 Brooklyn, a drug price research firm. Here's Antonio Chacha, 46 Brooklyn's CEO.
January is prime time for list price changes on brand name drugs. So in examining where we are today, we're pretty much in line with the last, few years.
And while those drug price hikes are pretty modest, a median of 4%, they still have an effect on the overall health system. These are list prices, which play a role in which drugs insurers choose to cover and what the patient ultimately pays at the pharmacy counter.
But I thought the Trump administration was actively trying to lower drug prices, so what's going on here?
Yeah, the Trump administration has been trying to crack down on high drug prices in America and getting other countries to pay their, quote, fair share. The administration calls it most favored nation drug pricing. Since the end of September, 16 companies have made deals in exchange for a break on certain tariffs. The deals vary, but include discounts on some drugs available to people paying cash, that is, not using their health insurance. A new website with those offers called TrumpRx.gov is supposed to launch later this month, but the 46 Brooklyn data show that, in fact, all of those companies have increased at least some of their list prices so far in 2026.
So if I understand correctly, you're saying that some of these companies raised prices even though they made deals with the Trump administration?
Yeah, the deals were short on details and were limited. They mentioned cash prices for some drugs and some vague commitments for Medicaid discounts, something the program already gets. The bigger pledge was for future drugs being launched at the same price here as in other wealthy countries, but that leaves a lot of the company's products untouched. Here's Dr. Ben Rome, a physician and health policy researcher at Brigham and Women's Hospital.
Those deals probably are not very important in terms of manufacturer drug pricing and the prices paid by most Americans for prescription drugs.
So Pfizer, which inked the first Trump administration deal in the fall, raised prices on 72 products, according to 46 Brooklyn. They include a 15% increase on the price of its COVID shot.
And what does Pfizer say about that?
Yeah, Pfizer says its price increases were modest and necessary to invest in new medicines and address added costs. In an email to NPR, Pfizer also pointed out that while list prices have gone up, the prices insurance companies pay them have gone down because of bigger rebates and discounts. I asked the Trump administration about the January price increases, and the White House told me list prices don't really matter.
Okay, Sydney, we've talked about increases, but were there any decreases?
There were 18 big price cuts in the first few days of the year, including 4 drugs that were part of Medicare drug price negotiation, which was actually a Biden administration initiative. The negotiations lowered prices for Medicare, and a big question was whether that would affect prices for everyone else. Now, we see that it was likely at least a factor in lowering prices in the commercial market. Fiasp, an insulin, got a 75% price cut. Farxiga and Jardiance, both for diabetes and heart failure, and the blood thinner Eliquis also got big price drops. But I should add that these are decisions that companies make based on a variety of factors and policies.
NPR Pharmaceuticals correspondent Sydney Lupkin, thank you.
You bet.
It has been a tumultuous and occasionally violent week for anti-ICE protesters in the Twin Cities. Federal immigration officers have arrested some of these protesters and tackled or tear-gassed others. Last month, the ACLU sued on behalf of protesters and observers. The group says the agents are violating the free speech rights of peaceful demonstrators. Now, the federal government says that it's simply trying to keep unruly crowds from obstructing lawful immigration enforcement. NPR's Martin Costi joins us now to talk about the fight over free speech during a crackdown. Hi, Martin.
Hi, Elsa.
Okay, so let's start with this ACLU lawsuit. What exactly are Minnesota protesters alleging there?
The lead plaintiff in that case, Susan Tincher, gives this story. She says that in December, she got an alert about ICE activity in her neighborhood there in Minneapolis. She went there and she asked an officer, "Are you ICE?" And she was told to get back. And the lawsuit says that in just a few seconds, agents pushed her to the ground, cuffed her, and took her to a federal building. And she was later released without being charged. So the lawsuit says that's a part of a pattern. Agents apparently retaliating against people for exercising their constitutional rights to observe them, to ask questions, and take video of these operations.
Okay, well, since that happened in December, reports of these kinds of incidents have increased dramatically this year, right? Like, especially after an ICE officer shot and killed Renee McElgood in Minneapolis last week. Where does this lawsuit stand at the moment?
They're trying to get the federal judge, Catherine Menendez, to issue a restraining order this week, if they can, against certain federal tactics. In a hearing yesterday, the attorneys representing the plaintiffs said they wanted an order that would stop actions such as arresting or threatening to arrest people who are lawfully protesting or watching federal agents, as well as pulling over the cars that are following them. And the lawyers of the government say that the agents are just taking appropriate actions when facing what they deem to be hostile crowds or cars that are, quote, chasing them.
Is that illegal, though, following ICE officers around or observing them or recording
And traditionally, that has not been considered illegal per se. On the question of tailing officers, though, I did talk to Jim Bierman, who's a former chief of police in California, now the president of a think tank called Future Policing Institute. And he says officers do have a legitimate need to find out if they're being, why, I should say, they're being followed.
Probably 90% of the time it's just going to be these monitors who mean them no harm. But there are instances in this country's history of police officers being ambushed. There's going to be somebody, someplace, sometime who's probably going to ambush some of these ICE agents or do something violent toward them.
But he says that doesn't mean they should arrest people. Bierman says that as a police chief, he would tell his officers to talk to the person following them, see if the person is a threat. If he's not, let that person keep following and wait for him to get tired and stop.
Okay, well, let's talk about the federal government's justification here. They say these agents are simply pushing back against people who are impeding law enforcement. Do they have a point there?
Civil rights experts think that the Trump administration is trying to broaden the definition of what the law about impeding says to include things like following agents or coordinating protests, maybe. And they point to a recent memo from the Attorney General's office, which categorizes impeding federal officers under a larger strategy for combating domestic terrorism. Now, usually impeding means materially obstructing, blocking officers physically, or concealing a person that they're seeking. And of course, if you break the law if you put your hands on an officer or ignore a lawful order to disperse.
Sure.
But now we're seeing videos from around the country of ICE officers just telling motorists that they'll be arrested for following them. And if you add that to this memo about domestic terrorism, there's a sense that maybe there's going to be some new situations and some new charges that people might face.
That is NPR's Martin Costi, who covers law enforcement. Thank you so much, Martin.
You're welcome.
Listening to All Things Considered from NPR News.
It's 3:44 and this is News 88.7 in depth. I'm Gail DeLauder. Hundreds of thousands of visitors from around the world are expected in Houston this summer for the World Cup. It could have $1 billion impact for the city. News 88.7's Michael Atkinson reports Houston could be one of the leading destinations in North America for people planning to attend the World Cup.
On a cool Friday in December, hundreds of soccer fans gathered at Little Woodrow's East downtown to watch the 2026 World Cup final draw, determining which teams would be in each group and which matches could come to Houston.
I'm supposed to be working on the clock, so I'm actually behind the scenes.
That's Herman. He didn't want to share his last name because he wasn't supposed to be there, but he felt this was a moment he couldn't pass up.
Football it's a language, it's a culture, it's heritage. You see the ball playing, it's a sport of the people.
With 7 matches in Houston, officials are estimating as many as 500,000 people are going to come to the city for the World Cup. That's the equivalent of Houston's population increasing by 20% for just 3 weeks.
If everybody can think back to what it was like to have the Super Bowl here.
Chris Canetti is president of Houston's World Cup host committee.
It's as though we're hosting 7 Super Bowls in 21 days. Each one of the games from Houston will be broadcast to a worldwide audience of 200 million people. The Super Bowl gets 125 million.
Canetti characterizes his job as being in charge of all things World Cup related in Houston. It's a role he's been in since 2018, shortly after FIFA announced North America would host the 2026 World Cup. At first, his task was convincing FIFA that Houston would be a great host city. Now, his job is putting that into practice.
We have a contract with FIFA that says we're obligated to do certain things to make the World Cup happen here in Houston. So the main thing that this host committee does is it fulfills that contract. Again, on things like safety and security and transportation and stadium improvements and you name it. We have to set the table and make sure the venue is ready for the party that's about to come. And then FIFA brings the party.
That includes covering up the name of NRG Stadium, where the matches will take place. The World Cup is particular about its sponsors, and the stadiums are going to be referred to by the name of the city where they're located. So, NRG Stadium for the World Cup will be called Houston Stadium. But there are other bigger plans in the next 5 months. The Houston Host Committee will hold a month-long free fan festival in East Downtown, where fans can watch every single match through the entirety of the World Cup. Renderings depict it looking like a small music festival. Airbnb, one of the World Cup's official sponsors, is investing $1 million in a 7-mile walkable path from that fan festival all the way to the stadium. Airbnb's head of policy, Laura Spangen, says as many as 31,000 guests from around the world could stay in an Airbnb in Houston.
That's going to translate into about $372 million in GDP generated by travel on Airbnb in and around Houston.
Houston also had one of the biggest surges in online searches for inbound flights, according to travel agency Kayak. Sarah Kennedy is a travel trend expert with Kayak.
There's a year-over-year increase of 250%.
She says Houston also had a 250% increase in flight searches from one week to the next after that group selection draw in December.
Houston is definitely at the top of the list. The only two host cities that are currently surpassing Houston in terms of a surge in interest are Boston and Dallas.
Already, FIFA officials say this is the most demand they've ever seen for a World Cup. As of late December, FIFA reported fans requested 150 million tickets to the tournament. Officials estimate the World Cup could bring a $1.5 billion economic impact to Houston alone. For News 88.7 In Depth, I'm Michael Atkinson.
And at 3:48 on a Wednesday afternoon, you're listening to All Things Considered on News 88.7. 69 degrees right now here at the UH campus. I'm Dave Pittman, and out on the freeways, if your 2026 Bingo card has a space for oversized semi hits the Houston Street overpass on the eastbound side of I-10, you can check it off. The first one of the year happened almost 4 hours ago. 2 right lanes are blocked, 2 left lanes getting through, and you're going to be backed up to around Patterson. Still ahead on the program, President Trump's use of military force has drawn a whole lot of criticism.
The American people need to be asking the question, are these military interventions enhancing our security and our prosperity and our values?
We'll have more on the global impact of Trump's aggressive foreign policy moves following top-of-the-hour news from NPR News 88.7's Gail DeWater.
Support comes from Rothko Chapel, presenting the 31st MLK birthday observance. We Got Us, Health and Care Beyond Capitalism, on January 15th at 6:30 p.m. More information at rothkochapel.org.
Support comes from the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, presenting Art and Life in Imperial Rome, Trajan and His Times, exploring the impact Emperor Trajan had on art and culture during his reign. Now on view, tickets at mfah.org.
My name is Michael Lawson, Houston Market President of St. Luke's Health, a member of Common Spirit Health. Access to quality information is vital for healthy communities to thrive. That's why St. Luke's Health is a proud supporter of Houston Public Media.
Houston Public Media is licensed to the University of Houston System, governed by the UH Board of Regents. Information about open meetings, dates, times, and locations is online at uhsystem.edu.
From NPR News, this is All Things Considered. I'm Elsa Chang.
And I'm Juana Summers. If you've heard music from the hit show Orange is the New Black, you've heard the work of husband and wife TV composers Brandon Jay and Gwendolyn Sanford.
Last year, they were among the many who lost their homes in the Palisades and Eaton Canyon fires that ripped through the greater Los Angeles area.
We managed to save my wife's acoustic guitar and one of my electric guitars.
But Brandon Jay says they sadly lost hundreds of other instruments. And it made him think about other musicians in the area, which brings us to this week's edition of Here to Help, our series focused on service and community.
A week after the fire, I did a Facebook post talking about the value of instruments, and I mentioned just a handful of instruments that were special to us that we lost. I talked about them in that the value of instruments isn't necessarily the monetary value, but it's like the sentimental and the emotional value that you have attached to them and the stories behind them that make them special, and that I wanted to replace them with ones that I got from friends.
A week later, Jay and his wife played a local community event in Pasadena. Friends, acquaintances, and even people he hadn't seen in years showed up with instruments, some of them identical to the ones they'd lost in the fire.
That event would give Jay the idea to launch several projects to give back to the musical community. First, there's Altadena Musicians, a registry for artists to sign up for help replacing their lost gear. to exchange stories.
And then just kind of snowballed from there. And we got a website up and running pretty quickly at the end of January. And so people reach out and like share these stories of what they lost.
The organization also created an app that helps streamline the instrument donation process and a free record store where music lovers can begin to replace record collections that may have been lost in fires too, which Jay says can feel like a bigger hit than losing instruments.
Because it's something that you collect over like your whole lifetime. Like you start when you're young with your first album that you saved up for, or you got for Christmas or whatever, and you remember all the memories. And so many people lost that. They lost that lifelong thing. And we can just keep this going and start to like help people start to replace their instruments in their record collections and just be like this musical hub for the community, for people to get together and see each other and stay connected.
Altadena Musicians has also raised enough money to launch a physical space for live music performances, rehearsals, recording, and instrument repairs.
Brandon Jay says even though it's been a year since the fires, he hopes this effort can help artists who are coping with their losses for a long time to come.
I just want it to be like an ongoing situation because for so many people, they're not ready yet. Like, I'm not ready yet to have everything that I lost. Like, they have limited space where they are, and they're just, like, emotionally not ready. And then, like, a couple years from now, when they are ready, I wanted it to be available to them so that they wouldn't have to worry about that expense.
For more stories about volunteerism, check out npr.org/here to help.
Every year, there is a big concert here in Washington, D.C., celebrating the life of Martin Luther King Jr. It's called Let Freedom Ring. It's featured Aretha Franklin, Gladys Knight, and Leslie Odom. Common is performing this year. It has been a signature event at the Kennedy Center for more than 20 years. This year, it'll be at a different venue. NPR's Elizabeth Blair has more.
Let Freedom Ring was initiated by Georgetown University in 2003. The choir is made up of singers from the school and gospel groups in the D.C. region. Last year, one of the headliners was Esperanza Spalding.
Esperanza Spalding, please don't tell her, but man, that is my celebrity crush.
Mark Bamuti Joseph was the Kennedy Center's Artistic Director for Social Impact, a division that created programs for underserved communities in the D.C. region. He was one of the speakers at last year's Let Freedom Ring, which was held on the same day as President Trump's inauguration to his second term.
Y'all have been very cordial, I have to say, and that is not in the radical spirit of the man that we are here to celebrate. So I'd appreciate it if y'all acted like y'all knew.
Everyone in the audience was very well aware of the sobriety that came with having this celebration on the same day as the inauguration of the 47th president. And so we needed in that moment a little bit of permission to access joy.
1 month after Let Freedom Ring, Trump took over the Kennedy Center and appointed new leadership. Shortly after, dissolved the Social Impact Division. Bamuti and his team were laid off. For the first time since 2003, Let Freedom Ring will not take place at the Kennedy Center. Georgetown University says it's changing the venue to save money. But Bamuti thinks it wouldn't have been appropriate to celebrate King at the Kennedy Center right now.
I would much rather that we all be spared the hypocrisy of celebrating a man who not only fought for justice, but articulated the case for equity maybe better than anyone in American history, when the official position of this administration is an anti-equity position.
The Let Freedom Ring celebration became a signature event for the Kennedy Center. Presidents George W. Bush and Barack Obama both attended the event. Composer Nolan Williams Jr. has been the event's music producer since 2004.
You celebrate the time that was and the impact that has been and never be erased. And then you move forward to the next thing.
This year, Williams wrote a piece for the event called Just Like Selma, inspired by one of King's most famous quotes. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice.
There is an arc, a moral compass charting freedom.
startled how that arc allows some things hard to explain.
Williams says sometimes the quote is interpreted in a passive way.
The arc doesn't just happen to move. We have to be agents of change. We have to be active arc movers, arc benders. And so throughout the song, you hear like these action words like protest, resist, endure, agitate, fight hate. And those are all the action words that remind us of the responsibility that we have to be arc benders.
This year's Let Freedom Ring will be held at the historic Howard Theater. The rapper and actor Common will join choirs made up of singers from Georgetown University and D.C. area churches. The Kennedy Center announced this week that its celebration of Martin Luther King Jr. Day will feature the Missionary Kings of Harmony. Elizabeth Blair, NPR News, Washington.
You're listening to All Things Considered from NPR News.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from your part-time controller, specializing in nonprofit accounting and committed to supporting nonprofits with financial management services such as budgeting and forecasting. yptc.com/NPR. From Melville Charitable Trust, committed to ensuring all people have a safe, stable, and affordable home that allows them to thrive. Information about ways to prevent and solve homelessness is at melvilletrust.org. And from the Kauffman Foundation, providing access to opportunities that help people achieve financial stability, upward mobility, and economic prosperity, regardless of race, gender, or geography. Kauffman.org.
We're a minute away from 4 on a Wednesday afternoon, and it's All Things Considered here on your NPR station, News 88.7. Out on the roads, it's 4 hours and counting now for the cleanup to remove the big rig that was just a little bit too tall to make it under the Houston Street overpass on the eastbound side of I-10. That's going to be backed up from around Patterson as you're down to 2 left lanes. Sunset at 5:43. It'll be clear and breezy overnight with a low around 40. Tomorrow's sunrise at 7:18. Going to do a little zigzagging with the afternoon highs. 58 tomorrow, 71 on Friday, 55 on Saturday, and then back up into the 60 to 65 degree range for Sunday and MLK Day. Right now it's 70 here at your NPR station, KUHF Houston News 88.7 in service of the University of Houston. It's 4 o'clock.
We are going to do something on Greenland, whether they like it or not.
How President Trump is disrupting the global order and returning to a vision reminiscent of the 19th century.
For Wednesday, January 14th, this is All Things Considered from NPR News.
I'm Elsa Chang.
And I'm Juana Summers. What are the legal consequences for last week's fatal shooting by ICE in Minneapolis?
Vice President J.D. Vance says federal agents have absolute immunity, but many legal experts disagree.
No one is above the law. Federal agents go into a state and start committing crimes. They are liable to the state.
Also, NPR runs a price check on 114 items at Walmart.
And a huge oak tree that's more than 2 centuries old was struck by lightning and needs to be chopped down.
I touched it and I felt the energy of this tree, and it just spoke to me.
Now News.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Ryland Barton. President Trump says he's been told on good authority that executions in Iran have stopped, even as Tehran has signaled fast trials and executions ahead in its crackdown on protesters.
We have been informed by very important sources on the other side, and they've said the killing has stopped and the executions won't take place. There was supposed to be a lot of executions today, and that the executions won't take place, and we're going to find out.
He provided few details to support the claim. It comes after he told protesting Iranians in recent days that, quote, help is on the way, but it's unclear what he meant by that. The State Department says it will stop immigrant visas for citizens of 75 countries who are deemed likely to require public assistance while living in the U.S. The countries include Afghanistan, Iran, Russia, and Somalia. The suspension begins January 21st and will not apply to applicants seeking tourist or business visas. The department says it's, quote, bringing an end to the abuse of America's immigration system. There has been no court decision yet on Minnesota's request to stop President Trump's immigration crackdown. A federal judge gave the Trump administration until Monday to respond. Meanwhile, federal agents continue to pull people from cars and confront angry bystanders in the state's largest cities. NPR's Sergio Martinez Beltran has been witnessing arrests.
In the city of Minneapolis, it's impossible to miss federal immigration agents. They are everywhere. The immigration enforcement operations include arresting people in the streets. NPR was able to witness multiple of those arrests today, including one at a bus stop. The arrests tend to happen pretty quick. Agents jump off their unmarked vehicles with their faces covered. They surround an individual for questioning. If the person cannot prove they are in the U.S. legally, they are arrested. Minneapolis has been on edge since the shooting of Renee Good last week by an ICE agent. On Tuesday, the Department of Homeland Security shared on social media an old interview where Stephen Miller, the White House's Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy, said immigration agents have federal immunity while performing their duty. Sergio Martinez Beltran, NPR News, Minneapolis.
FBI agents searched a Washington Post reporter's home early today. NPR's Ryan Lucas reports the search was part of a government investigation into a possible leak of classified information.
The FBI searched the home of Washington Post journalist Hannah Natanson, who has been one of the newspaper's lead reporters on the Trump administration's efforts to reshape the federal workforce. In a post on social media, Attorney General Pam Bondi did not identify Natanson by name, but said the FBI executed the search warrant at the home of a Washington Post reporter who was receiving classified information from a Pentagon contractor. The FBI search sparked immediate concern among First Amendment advocates. The president of the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press, Bruce Brown, called the search, quote, a tremendous escalation in the administration's intrusions into the independence of the press. Ryan Lucas, NPR News, Washington.
U.S. stock indexes dropped today. You're listening to NPR News from Washington.
Live from News 88.7 in Houston, I'm Gail DeLauder. The interim Harris County attorney says Governor Abbott doesn't have the authority to take over county elections. Abbott's threat came after State Senator Paul Bettencourt said more than 100 county residents were registered to vote at post office boxes. Jonathan Fonbon discussed the issue on today's Hello Houston.
There are all these checks along the way to make sure that we don't get to the point where a voter who doesn't reside in the right place votes in that place. So like you said, when we talk about fraud, I think what we think of is a voter who's either not allowed to vote, casting a vote, or who's allowed to vote but not allowed to vote in a certain place, casting a vote.
Fonbon was sworn in during Commissioner's Court last week. Students at Galveston's Ball High School have started classes at their new campus. News 88.7's Juliana Washburn has more on the new facility.
The new Ball High School campus has state-of-the-art classrooms, technical training spaces, and new science labs. It was funded by a $315 million bond package passed back in 2022. Galveston ISD Superintendent Matthew Neighbors says the old Ball High School building had a number of infrastructure problems. Neighbors says students and staff were buzzing with excitement as they stepped into the new building.
Well, our students are finally up to par. And I think that they feel like that they matter. Our staff feels like that they matter.
The district is renovating the old Ball High School to turn it into a new gymnasium and aquatic center. That's expected to be done by 2028. From the Galveston County Bureau, I'm Juliana Washburn, News 88.7.
Concert tickets are now on sale for this year's Rodeo Houston. Chris Stapleton is one of the performers, along with Kelly Clarkson and Lizzo. The rodeo says tickets go on sale in 2 groups depending on the date of the performance. And there's more information on rodeo tickets at houstonpublicmedia.org. Clear skies tonight. Overnight lows should be around 41 degrees. For tomorrow, sunny, high near 58. And then tomorrow night, clear skies, overnight low around 45 degrees. I'm Gail DeLauder, News 88.7.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, supporting creative people and effective institutions committed to building a more just, verdant, and peaceful world. More information is at macfound.org.
From NPR News, this is All Things Considered. I'm Elsa Chang in Culver City, California.
And I'm Juana Summers in Washington. In a series of stories, NPR is exploring America's changing role in the world. Today, we look at how President Trump is upending the global order. This comes as Trump takes an increasingly strident tone about possible action in Iran. Here's NPR's Greg Myrie on the way Trump is redefining America first.
The year is 1949. President Harry Truman is building a new global order from the smoldering ruins of World War II. The U.S. takes the starring role in international organizations like NATO.
In this treaty, we seek to establish freedom from aggression and from the use of force in the North Atlantic community.
The NATO community, then and now, includes Greenland. And here's what President Trump is now saying.
We are going to do something on Greenland, whether they like it or not, because if we don't do it, Russia or China will take over Greenland.
In his first term, Trump scaled back the U.S. role in a host of international institutions. He still sees these networks as a burden. What's new this time around is his willingness to turn to the military. In the past year, the U.S. has bombed 4 countries in the Middle East and 2 in Africa. Trump has threatened others, both friends and foes, and the U.S. recently ousted Venezuela's president, Nicolas Maduro.
We're going to run it, essentially, until such time as a proper transition can take place.
Michael McFaul is a former U.S. ambassador to Russia.
The American people need to be asking the question, are these military interventions enhancing our security and our prosperity and our values? And in my estimation, they are not.
In Venezuela, Trump is working with the holdovers of Maduro's regime. He's dismissive of the country's opposition, though its candidate was considered the overwhelming winner in a 2024 presidential election. McFaul has a new book entitled Autocrats versus Democrats. He says that in several places, including Venezuela,
I'm not sure what side of that divide President Trump is on. He could have easily just said, we're removing Maduro, and we are now going to help the democratically elected president.
As Trump takes apart the 20th century world order, he's embracing elements of 19th century foreign policy, like the Monroe Doctrine. This dates to President James Monroe's 1823 declaration that European colonial powers should not meddle in the Western Hemisphere. Since then, U.S. presidents have given this their own interpretation. Trump is now touting his version, the Monroe Doctrine. The State Department summed it up in a social media post that showed a scowling Trump with the words, "This is our hemisphere." Ian Bremmer heads the Eurasia Group, a global research and consulting firm. He says Trump is having an impact on Latin America and beyond.
Allies are playing defense in the near term because they don't want to get hurt. They don't want to be in a fight with the U.S., but long term, they're hedging. Long term, they're doing everything they can to not have to rely on the United States as much.
Foreign policy analysts say Trump is also expressing a related 19th century notion, spheres of influence. The idea is that large powers can impose their will in their own regions, and smaller countries have little choice but to comply. In short, the U.S. will dominate the Western Hemisphere. Russia's Vladimir Putin will play a leading role in Europe. And China's Xi Jinping will dictate terms in Asia. Hal Brands is with the conservative American Enterprise Institute.
If great powers just sort of get to do what they want in their respective spheres of influence, that's kind of the world that Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin want to bring about. It's a world that they would be very comfortable with.
In his first term, Trump wanted to pull U.S. troops out of foreign conflicts. This time, he sent the military on bombing raids against countries that include Iran and Yemen in the Middle East, and Nigeria and Somalia in Africa. Brands sees a pattern.
The preferred Trump method of military intervention is you use a lot of force to hit somebody really hard, and then you let somebody else sort out the consequences.
Trump says these shows of strength give the U.S. leverage when it comes to making peace. And the president has had diplomatic successes, like a ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas conflict. Still, Ian Bremmer says Trump overestimates unilateral U.S. clout and underestimates the value of partners.
The Americans are giving away the store long term on what has allowed them to so successfully project power. It has been a willingness to align, not all the time, but a fair amount, with allies. And Trump is throwing that out the window.
Meanwhile, the president's global pullback continues. Last week, the Trump administration announced the U.S. withdrawal from 66 international organizations. His administration called them wasteful and ineffective. Greg Myrie, NPR News, Washington.
A federal investigation is underway after an immigration and customs enforcement officer fatally shot a 37-year-old woman in Minneapolis last week. Meanwhile, the state of Minnesota is gathering its own evidence about the shooting after the FBI shut the state's investigative agency out of the case and declined to share federal evidence. As the facts of last week's deadly shooting remain disputed, there's also disagreement about what the law is. Here's Vice President J.D. Vance speaking from the White House last Thursday.
The precedent here is very simple. You have a federal law enforcement official engaging in federal law enforcement action. That's a federal issue. That guy is protected by absolute immunity. He was doing his job.
Well, some legal experts have pushed back on that point about absolute immunity. David Cole is a law professor at Georgetown University and the former national legal director at the American Civil Liberties Union. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for being with us. I want to start with the vice president's comments there. Do federal agents have so-called absolute immunity at the federal level for crimes they commit while on duty?
Absolutely not. And the vice president should know better, having gone to law school. No one is above the law. Federal agents go into a state and start committing crimes, including murdering people. They are liable to the state to the same extent as everyone else, with some exceptions. But they are not absolutely immune.
Okay, well, in the meantime, as the federal government investigates this case, as they say they're doing, can we just bring up some words that Todd Blanche, the Justice Department's Deputy Attorney General, has already said? He said, quote, "There is currently no basis for a criminal civil rights investigation." So I'm just a little confused. Where does that leave this federal investigation if they've already concluded there's no basis for a criminal civil rights investigation?
Well, I think this is a real problem when the government is investigating itself and when the top level of the government has made clear, not just Todd Blanche, but President Trump, that they don't want any accountability for this individual, that they are backing this